Transportation and Circulation Committee to order. I'll take that. Thank you. And we will start with a roll call.
Committee Member Bradley. Kaufman Gray.
Here.
France. Here. Horn.
Here.
Let's see, Rodriguez.
Here.
Tabor. Chair Blackerby.
Here. Thank you. So I just want to mention, if it's okay with everyone on the committee, just a swapping of items on the agenda. We're going to move number 7, the Las Positas Cliff Drive intersection, up to number 6 and move the 6-year CIP down to number 7. So we'll take that one last. So now we can entertain any public comment for items not on the agenda. If there are any of those. Okay, moving right along. Approval of minutes from our September 27th meeting.
I move to accept.
All right, is there a second? Second. Ms. Horn seconds. And all those in favor? Any discussion? Changes? Nothing? All right. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions?
I'm going to have to abstain.
Abstain, I wasn't there.
Okay, Rodriguez and France abstain. Great. So those are adopted or approved. All right, moving right along. Number 3, the monthly August and September reports and the first quarter report from MTD. I don't see anyone from MTD, but perhaps Mr. Allen.
Informational
Yeah.
item for the committee. Benefit if you have any questions, we can answer them. Otherwise, we can just go on to the next item.
Okay. Are there any questions? I just want to say really quickly about MTD that since our last meeting, we've lost somebody who's come before this committee a lot, David Damiano, who worked there for many years and was really instrumental on the downtown and waterfront shuttle. So just want to say that's a huge loss to our community and especially the transportation community. But yeah, any questions? He did pass away. Yeah.
Just one comment, just so the audience knows. Since the downtown shuttle, they raised the rates from a quarter to 50 cents. I noticed that between the August and September, the decrease is less than what it was when it first happened. So it went from like 19% ridership down to 17. So, I mean, it's starting to come back.
Right. Great. Any other comments or questions about the reports? All right. Moving right along. Okay. Number 4, East Side Neighborhood Transportation Management Plan. I'm going to have a presentation by Jessica Grant.
Good evening, Chair Blackerby, committee members, Jessica Grant, Public Works Department. I'm going to be the project manager for the Eastside Neighborhood Transportation Management Plan effort. Very excited about this planning effort. Tonight I'm here before you as an informational item to discuss the Eastside Neighborhood Transportation Management Plan. And I'm going to be covering what the plan goal is, the objectives, what the area of interest is, the timeline, and measures for the success of this planning effort. As you may have known, on September 18th, 2012, City Council had an information item on this where we received direction from them to begin this planning effort. And like I said, I am very excited to begin this process. So the goal of the East Side Plan is to respond to neighborhood livability by addressing pedestrian and traffic safety issues. For the objectives, we have about 5 objectives developed. And the first being engage the East Side neighborhood regarding pedestrian and traffic safety concerns by using a multimedia approach and innovative communication strategies to a diverse neighborhood. The second objective is to identify existing traffic safety issues through crash analysis and provide traffic engineering solutions to address those issues. The main focus on this part of the effort is going to be Derek Bailey, our traffic engineer. Number 3 is to establish and prioritize the neighborhood's pedestrian and traffic safety concerns. And that's going to be one of the big focus for our first workshop that we hope to have in the end of January. And a fourth one is to inform and educate the adjacent neighborhoods about the East Side planning process and the potential effects it may have on the other neighborhoods. And then the fifth objective is to propose short and long-term improvements that are responsive to the neighborhood and address those safety issues. And we hope to go over those in the second workshop, which we call the Approach Workshop. So when I'm talking about this study effort, we had to pick a interest area. What you see before you and highlighted in yellow is the interest area, with Cannon Perdido being to the north, Salinas approximately on the east, Punta Gorda on the south, and Milpas Street on the west. If it comes in this process, it's not meant to be a hard boundary. It's just an area of interest, and what we've received in feedback to date from the East Side walks that the coast has led. And but if something comes up, say right here, it's not that the city will ignore that. We will definitely take all issues under consideration. So as far as the timeline, this is what September 18th, of course, the council is what initiated the process. And tonight I'm here as the informational item. Next Wednesday I'll be before the Neighborhood Advisory Council, again as an informational item. Beginning as soon as we've received the direction from council, we've been busy collecting some baseline data, getting some information ready, starting to develop a survey, meeting with a lot of city staff about best ways to engage the East Side Committee. We've also started to meet. We've had some just initial preliminary meetings with Coast and the Santa Barbara Bike Coalition. We've also have had check-in with the East Side School principals, because the big target audience of this whole effort is families and receiving feedback from them. And what better way to work with the families is also through the schools. And it's really important for the city and the schools to foster a relationship partnership for the safe and efficient movement of children to and from school. And again, how they move around in the rest of the neighborhood. There's various meetings that I'll be doing outside of sort of the key workshops. We're required at most to have 2 workshops, but I will be out in the community at various neighbor meetings, etc., PTAs, just trying to receive feedback. But we will have, we are required for the city to have a workshop, and again I hope to have it in late January. We're working with the schools on a date. We'd like to have it at a school facility where we're right in the area where it would be easier for families to get to rather than maybe coming, say, to this room. Next step after that leads us into the phase 2 internal process. Again, we would be collecting all of the feedback from the residents and start to develop what those various themes might be. That's when I would be talking with Derek Bailey, our traffic engineer, to see how his separate analysis on crash data, if there's any themes between the concerns and what some of the data is showing. And then we'd move into our second workshop, which we hope to have in March, and that's the Approaches Workshop. We are already anticipating with what the neighborhood concerns will be. So there's going to be some short-term approaches, and there's going to be some long-term approaches. then again, through the approaches workshop, we would get some feedback and what the residents like to see, because the whole purpose of this process is to help facilitate and provide a voice for the East Side residents. After that, we would be compiling a report back, and then we would start to interface back with the committees again. Hope to go in the spring to the Neighborhood Advisory Council in May, where they would be providing feedback to the Transportation Circulation Committee. And then you would have your official recommendations to City Council. And the target for that meeting is in June of 2013, where we would have the final presentation of the East Side Neighborhood Enhancement Priorities. So on a government time frame, this is 9 months. It will go very, very quickly, but we're excited to begin. So through this process, we have to, how do we know we're going to be, how are we going to gauge if we're going to be successful? What are some of those benchmarks? What we've developed is 5. So for A and B, the degree to which the East Side feels the neighborhood is a safe place to drive, bike, and walk. And then B, the degree to which the East Side neighborhood feels that city representatives are actively listening. We hope to capture that initially via surveys and feedback that we have through the various workshops and meetings. C is measured reduction in the number and severity of crashes in the East Side neighborhood. And again, Mr. Bailey is putting together the initial benchmarks for that. And D, street speed surveys. And finally, the degree the surrounding neighborhoods know about the East Side planning efforts. That concludes my informational item. I will continue through this 9-month process to keep the TCC informed and what the workshop dates are going to be and other key milestones. Do you have any questions?
Well, we do have one public comment slip on this, so do you want to? Yeah, let's do that first. So Caitlin Carlson on behalf of Coast.
I'll be really quick, but I feel like since Coast has been mentioned in this, I should speak on behalf of Coast. My name is Caitlin Carlson, and I work on the East Side Walks project and have been since January of 2011. And I just want to publicly thank Jessica Grant and Public Works and the rest of the city for taking the lead on this. But I also really want to urge that because the East Side has had a history of being looked over, forgotten, pushed aside, that we don't want to repeat ourselves. We really want this specific projects to be made a priority. We don't want to miss any deadlines, and we don't want to have to wait another 2 years just in order to, and would lose all the momentum of the great work that we've been doing. So that's basically all I want to say, and thank you very much.
Great. Thank you. So there are questions. Since it's just an informational item, we don't have to do anything, but we can definitely ask some questions.
Chair might just say this is our first public presentation of our schedule, the actual 8 neighborhood that we've identified, as well as the goals and the objectives. So we're actually kicking off this work effort today. So this is what we're moving out to the community with as of right now. So I just want the committee to know that, and members of the community. We've been working hard since September, developing the material that you've seen, as well as doing some background information. One other point I just wanted to make sure it's really understood is that Derek Bailey, who's been before this committee, a traffic engineer, is doing a parallel work effort. So he's currently looking at crash history, looking at the speeds in the neighborhood, to see if there's any traffic safety concerns that can be identified that he can address. And those concerns will also be brought before this committee. At the same time, we're bringing the work effort that transportation planning is doing as well. So it's a parallel process, and some of it's going to merge together. Mm-hmm. And there might be some that's not traffic safety that the residents want us to address that Derek will also be weighing in on whether or not it's an appropriate solution. So it's a collaborative effort between the traffic engineer and our staff here in transportation planning, and we're looking forward to this next process.
Great. Yeah. Mr. Kaufman-Gray?
Well, it's more of comments. I mean, I have to say, when I first joined the TCC, we were looking at where would be the next traffic management area, and the TCC was really leaning to wanting to do the east side, but then the Cottage Hospital project came, and they had money to do the Oak Park management plan. So it was decided that that's where the money was. So, and it was necessary. It needed to be done. So I'm very happy to see that the east side is finally getting their own management plan. I guess my question is, and maybe this is something council is going to do as it progresses, but I know without redevelopment agency money, where's the funding planning to come from for this project?
Well, this area is not would not have been eligible for redevelopment
Okay.
funding anyway. So there's really several sources of funds that we can look at, and something I discussed with the City Council back in September. Obviously our Streets Capital Improvement Program. Council could direct staff to reprioritize that program, and John Owazek will be discussing the CIP later on this evening. We always are looking for grants. So we have a Safe Route to School grant, for example, for Cleveland Elementary School on Salinas and Clifton. So that's a source of fund. Measure A, pedestrian, bicycle, and Safe Route to School is the other funding source. We're looking at applying for this next cycle. And then community development block grant funds, which is monies the city of Santa Barbara receives to do work in neighborhoods such as this. And we have been very successful in using block grant monies in this neighborhood. We have spent close to $3 million already in this area on projects, including lighting, sidewalk, access ramps. We currently have an access ramp project in process right now. We put bus shelters, so we have been doing work in this area. So when we go to City Council with the final report that's recommended by this committee, depending upon what it is the residents want us to do, we'll have a better idea of how much money we're going to need, and at that point in time, council can decide how to fund it, whether it be reprioritizing or streets capital or setting aside block grant money, or tell us go out and try and secure grants. But that's what we know as of this right now, but it's really difficult to say how much more we're going to need until we hear from the
They know what
residents.
they want. Okay, great. Thank you so
Right.
much.
Great. Yeah, Ms. Horn?
I just wanted to ask Browning what happened with the Milpas intersection, the flashing lights, and the pedestrian safety issues.
That is currently underway as we speak. In fact, I drove down Memphis this evening. They have done the restriping, and we have a contractor, and he will be doing the pedestrian refuge islands shortly. And the rectangular rapid flasher, all the equipment is on order too. So that should all be done within the next month or so.
Great, thank you.
Mr. Bradley?
Yeah, I'm glad to see it's such a, as you said, by government standards, a very fast schedule on this to get done by June, at least with the study phase. Because I think, Mr. Kaufman-Gray mentioned the St. Francis and Oak Park plans, and I think a big reason why those didn't turn out as good as they might have is just that it took so long, and the people who were, the residents who were originally all fired up about it got meeting fatigue after a few years. So, but the graphic sort of ended with it going to council, and I'm just hoping that once it goes to council, something can actually happen on the ground pretty quickly after that. I mean, we've seen at the, as you were just mentioning, the Milpas project, how fast it's been very impressive how fast that's happened after the decision was taken. So I'm hoping something similar can happen here.
Well, kind of responding to that, when Jessica had the slide was talking about short-term solutions and long-term solutions. So the short-term solutions are going to be more in Derek Bailey's area, the things that we can do right away, quick, less costly solutions that we can do. The long-term ones are going to be ones that we're going to have to generate some real dollars to move forward to. So we're looking at being able to move forward and implementing some things as quickly as possible. And one of the things we're going to be doing is applying for community block grant monies to do a lighting study, because I know one of the things the residents have asked for is additional street lights. So we're going to be doing both.
Great. Mr. France?
Thank you, Chair Blackerby. Thank you, Jessica Grant and Mr. Allen. I really appreciate both the engineering happening alongside the public engagement process, and Mr. Allen, you referred to how those might kind of intermingle along the way. One specific question I would have that I think would be helpful for those who are trying to look at the project area and try to think of different solutions, not just, I mean, as we go from kind of making comment as to what might be insufficient or what might be dangerous, what routes might need some type of work on them. As we start thinking about solutions, one tool that I would love to see made available to the public would be information kind of as possible in graphic form on vehicle counts. So for example, those maps where you have on each street the best estimates of the average daily trips, because I think we'll see a full spread from some streets that have maybe just a couple thousand average daily trips to 20,000 on Milpas. Also, there's such a mix of streets where stop signs are and then where speeds. So everyone who drives through the east side has their little tricks as to, like De La Guerra, for example, connecting by the schools gets really fast right before it hits Milpas because there's not stop signs for like 5 blocks in a row. And so average daily trips and speed counts as possible. And if obviously speed counts can't be done on every street, but just kind of some kind of graphic like green, yellow, red in terms of perceived speeds on different streets would be really helpful, maybe in between that first to second public engagement meeting. And that's information that would be helpful. One comment that I would make is I know for the biking community, as we start looking at this area, there's a real lack of Class 2 connected bikeways, and there's some suggested routes, and I know there's some updates. In fact, we met on the east side this week with the Bike Coalition, and definitely thinking out what are some improvements on the suggested routes. Because, for example, with the new Cacique undercrossing, that's going to greatly affect how the crosstown route should be directed, as well on Upper Milpas. So not just specific intersections, but through routes through the neighborhood, I hope are also considered in the public process. So thank you.
Yeah.
The what? Oh, so having a side conversation, Chair Blackerby and committee member Ed Prince, we as part of our initial collection data right now, we plan to have a very visual focus through the workshops, and when we start to move forward, meeting with the various neighborhood members. And so those are some of the items that you're mentioning are key items that we would love to graphically show as well. So they're in development as we speak.
I had a couple. I agree with what's been said, and I really do appreciate the meshing of look, not just saying to the community, hey, what do you want? And then the engineers go do their thing and they go, well, we can't do that. Or, this is what's better or whatever. So working alongside each other would be great. As far as access goes, one thing that I'm hoping we reach out to in the process is also maybe the Independent Living Resource Center. So folks serving our community with disabilities, because even though some people may live over on the east side or go and do things in the neighborhood, and I know that access has been an issue. So not just people with strollers, but people with other kinds of wheels, right, that really can't work around as much as other folks can. So that's one thing that I would recommend. And then the other thing, as far as access during the meetings, I'm assuming we're going to have translators and that all the materials that go out notifying the community will be bilingual.
Chair Blackerby, that's correct.
Great.
In terms of translation, we'll do similar to what we did for this meeting when we did the Milpas corridor, where we had a translator who was translating real time.
Simultaneous, yeah.
Simultaneous.
Perfect.
And we're also exploring putting on our website, having dual pages, one in English and one in Spanish.
That would be really important, I think. Mm-hmm. Other questions or comments?
Question. On the bilingual issue, do you have staff that are bilingual that will be at the neighborhood meetings, or is it all translators?
Chair Blackerby and Committee Member Rodriguez, Yet to be determined. We do have Spanish speakers on staff, and we haven't quite set the vision quite yet for our workshop. Do you have a specific recommendation or what you've seen in the past, or?
Well, just to say that when everything has to be translated, it slows everything down so much that if you're doing small focus groups, it would sure be nice if the person who's talking about the process was bilingual, talking to monolingual Spanish speakers.
Yeah, that's something certainly we're going to look at. You know, we are in communication with the folks in the Park Recreation Department who are bilingual and see what their involvement as well as school districts. It's definitely going to take a look at it. One other point I want to let the committee know that as we have meetings of this committee, we will update the committee, and in between meetings, as we have stuff to update, when we update the city council, we'll also update this committee, so you're kept apprised of where we are with the process.
Great. Yeah, as for the kind of language stuff, I'm happy to put you in contact. I know people who do simultaneous translation, so you'd have someone translating from Spanish into English. Everyone wears a headset if they're not bilingual, and that way it's not just one way, you know, someone speaking Spanish getting the English, but the people who don't, I mean, don't expect every engineer to be bilingual, but we want them to be able to understand what's happening, and it's always better to use a professional interpreter instead of putting the onus on someone who just happens to speak.
I've experienced both cases where we had the Spanish being translated to English and vice versa, so definitely going to take a look at it, and we'll be talking with the experts to see what the best way to get to the community. So.
Perfect.
Yeah.
All right, any other questions on this item? Well, thank you for your work. We're glad you're excited. I think we're excited. Hopefully the neighborhood's excited. Okay. These are number 5. Great. So number 5 is the pilot project on-street bicycle parking project. Sarah Grant is going to give a presentation.
Oh,
Let's start
sorry.
over. I thought that was really quiet.
Good evening, Chair Blackerby and committee members of the Transportation and Circulation Committee. I'm Sarah Grant, Mobility Coordinator of the Transportation Planning Division and Public Works of the City of Santa Barbara. And I'm here to present to you tonight the on-street bicycle parking pilot project. So here we go. Here's a brief outline of what I'm going to speak about tonight. I'll give you a little bit of a project background. We're going to talk about the community request, a little bit of background on the bicycle corral concept, the project proposal that the city has come up with our engineers, and we'll discuss the local business feedback, funding, policy consistency, and then we'll come back to review the recommendation. So a little bit of background. This project is fully driven by the community. This is a community request from business owners on the corner of Canon Perdido and Santa Barbara Street. And earlier this year, the City of Santa Barbara Public Works received 2 letters from the Santa Barbara Bicycle Coalition, along with 8 local businesses that are established there in that area. And those businesses are Handlebar Coffee Roasters, Say Cheese, Our Daily Bread, Julian, Sojourner Cafe, Drishti, Jane Deering Art Gallery, and 3 Pickles. And so in the letter, they identified the problem that they have in that area is that there is the available parking for bicycles is inadequate to meet demand. Here you see pictured the 800 block of Santa Barbara Street in front of Say Cheese and the bookstore, or what used to be the bookstore, and also right in front of 3 Pickles. As you can see, the bike racks are mostly full. Some are being leaned up against trees or poles in this scenario. This is in front of Julian on Canon Perdido. Available bike parking, once again, inadequate. They're further down the street. You can actually see a bike leaned up against a tree there as well. So the bike racks are full. Especially at lunchtime, I see quite a bit of activity here just through observation when doing this exercise. One of the other things that they noted in their letter was that the bicycles being parked on the sidewalk takes up valuable space on sidewalk for pedestrians and for outdoor dining. So over there in front of Our Daily Bread, it's quite a crowded sidewalk there. It's very narrow, and in front of Sojourner here as well. Also in their letters, they had identified that both employees and customers are in need of a convenient place to park, and that the current posts interfere with the outdoor dining. They also identified in the letters that their businesses are actually located right on a regional bike route. Actually, it's called the Crosstown Route. As you can see here in yellow, connects the east and the west sides, cutting right through the heart of downtown. And the star is where those businesses are located. In the second letter that they had sent, I mentioned that they sent 2 letters. They clarified their request to study 3 locations. They got some feedback from some other neighbors in the area, including the Santa Barbara Trust for Historic Preservation. And as you can see here, the 3 stars are the 3 locations that they asked us to look at. Furthest away, they asked us to look at the red zone, the no parking area in front of Julian. They asked us to look in front of the Sojourner in the first zone of parking, and then also near Handlebar Coffee Roasters, which is towards the end near the alleyway, which is the star that's closest to us. And so in our analysis of these 3 areas with engineering, the first location furthest away in the red zone, engineering felt that this would interfere with intersection operations, which was one of the concerns that was expressed by some of the business owners in the area. It's a very busy intersection, and so we would want to reduce any sort of conflict in the area. Not only is that location and the second location, which is in front of Sojourner, not an ideal location because cars that would be parked behind the facility, the visibility of the cyclist would be decreased if they were trying to leave the facility and enter the roadway. It would be difficult for the cyclist to see the oncoming motorist, and be difficult for the motorist to see the oncoming cyclist that would be leaving this facility. And the proximity to the intersection would also create potential conflict as well for cyclists trying to enter and leave. The third location was the preferred engineering option, which is in front of Handlebar Coffee Roasters and the Jane Deering Art Gallery. They're closest to the alley. And this was the preferred engineering option because it was furthest from the intersection and also had the best visibility because it had the natural break in the sidewalk because of the alley right there. So it provided a natural area for sight distance. So motorists that were coming towards the intersection at Santa Barbara Street would see cyclists that were preparing to leave the facility, and the cyclists would have better visibility of oncoming traffic in either direction when leaving the bike parking rack. One of the things was employee bike security was a concern of a few of the business owners there. This is behind some of the businesses, and the racks themselves are not that secure, and also because there's not a lot of activity back there, because there's no eyes on them per se all of the time, they are prone to theft. One of the business owners said that their employees experience a bike stolen once every couple months. So providing another facility is another option for them to park their bikes. I also am under the understanding that the owner of the building is looking at providing more secure parking for employees. But this would be attractive, this new facility, the one on the street, since there's a lot of activity and the eyes on the street concept for security of the bicycles. During our study, we also did a survey of the existing parking in the area. And on the block of Can Perdido Street, the 100 East block, there are currently 12 15-minute spaces and 9 75-minute spaces in actual use. And with the parking, with the bicycle corral parking, we would actually lose 2 spaces. And talk about that a little bit later. So we'd be reduced from 12 15-minute spaces to 10. We also looked at the overall area just to see how many vehicular parking spaces there were on that block, and then one block north and south on Santa Barbara Street, and then one block east on Canon Perdido towards Panino and Zaytunes, since that seemed like the more logical place where customers would logically park if they were attending to these businesses. And we were looking at 23 15-minute spaces existing, and 40 15-minute spaces and 19 90-minute spaces in the area. And once again, with the parking, the bicycle corral parking, we would lose 2 spaces of the 15, so we'd go from 23 15-minute spaces to 21. So the project proposal is to do a bicycle corral, and this is the on-street facility. This is an example of one of those facilities. One that we are proposing would look very similar to this. As you can see, the bicycles are off the sidewalk and they're on the street where bicycles do ride, and they're required to ride on the streets. And they are situated in the parking zone and outside of the vehicular traveling lane, so that they're out of the way of traffic. And where are communities doing bicycle corrals? Dozens and dozens of cities across America. They've just been sprouting up all over, from San Francisco to Long Beach, California, Seattle, Portland, Los Angeles, New York, Milwaukee, Boulder, Tucson, you name it. Probably every city either got one, they're working on it, or they're thinking about it. So this is not a unique project to be thinking about. It's definitely a concept that's been taking on. And if I can take a minute to show a 2-minute video here, which I have queued up. I can find the mouse. There we go. A little bit about bicycle corrals, and this is from the city of Portland.
Car parking to use it for a lot of on-street bicycle parking. Before this bike parking went in, on both sides of the street for this one block, there was enough space for 25 vehicles. Now, with a conversion, there's enough space for 65 vehicles.
There are a lot of really great benefits about these parking swaps, like we call them in New York City. They really enhance business. In front of the restaurant, there can be 22 bikes parked, whereas before there were probably about 2 cars.
We've always been a very bicycling-oriented company, and when they came to me with the idea of doing these corrals, it was instantaneous. Oh yeah, let's do it. It's been obviously very successful. They're very heavily used all the time, and the usual business argument that you've taken away parking just doesn't work here.
They really stop pitting pedestrians and cyclists. The bike parking is on the street in a better space than on the sidewalk, so pedestrians don't feel like their space has to be taken away.
Every time I've seen those on-street bike parking, they're completely full, like the one at Stumptown or Porcano over on Mississippi.
For up to me, this would stretch from one bike corral to the other, and there'd be nothing but bikes on this side of the street.
These bike corrals or on-street bike parking are great because they're very low cost and easy to install. There's no impact on any other utilities. We don't have to worry about pipes under the ground or where the water's going or anything, because they don't affect any of that. They just let the water run its course down the gutter.
The city does require that the businesses that have frontage to the bike corrals are responsible for maintenance, and that's simply because the city equipment can't get into this area anymore. Came over to this corral here at 34th, found it clean. So headed down to the one that we have down at the other corner at 33rd. That wasn't too bad. It's mostly just organic debris from the trees in the area.
A bike oasis.
So that was just a little preview so you could actually see. Is that it? There we go. Let me go right here. One more. Oh, left. Oops. Sorry. Thanks. So that just give you a more of a visual impact of what bike corral is like, and some of the thoughts about cyclists that use it and businesses in New York and in Portland. As they mentioned, some of the benefits of a bike corral, and these are some of the things that the business owners alluded to, is it removes the bikes from the pedestrian-oriented sidewalks and makes room for pedestrian activity and outdoor dining. It also organizes high-volume parking areas in an aesthetically pleasing way and attractive as well. It's attractive for cyclists to come to one facility where there's several racks. And it benefits local businesses by providing attractive and convenient parking for their customers, and increases overall parking capacity for you get 8 parking spaces for 1 car parking space. So you really optimize your parking capacity. The rack design that we're looking at using is very similar to the ones that you saw in the video. It's a staple rack with 2 points of contact. The vendor that we're looking at using, they actually have a rugged heat-bonded polyvinyl protective coating that doesn't rust, chip, scratch, crack, or peel, and bonus is that won't scrape or ding or mar bicycles as well. And it's available in the Santa Barbara green. So, awesome.
Of course.
And the reason why we're moving to this rack design of 2 points of contact, because when you only have 1 point of contact, I'm sure you've all seen this around town, and it's very sad to see when bikes have fallen to the ground, and it can damage the bikes, as well as it's not very pleasing to look at to see bikes falling on the sidewalk. So the proposal is, as I mentioned before, the engineering preferred option because of visibility and safety is to put it towards the alley near the Handlebar Coffee Roasters and the Jane Deering Art Gallery. And we presented 2 options to the business owners because in the letters they did not specify how many bicycle parking spaces they would like to have. The top one is 12 bicycle parking spaces, and the bottom one is for 18 spaces. When we did the analysis with engineering, turns out with either option, the amount of parking lost and the amount retained would remain the same. The reason being is that, well, in the top one, without removing any of the red curb, there would still be about 40 feet left of parkable curb. Our standard is about 20 feet or so per space for parallel parking. In talking to engineering, they said that their minimum requirement for this type of intersection would be 30 feet of red curb. So in the second option, we could actually reduce the about 37 feet of red curb to 30, gain a few extra feet, and still retain 2 parking spaces. In talking to many of the business owners, they felt, well, if there was no loss of parking, why not go for more parking spaces for both their customers and their employees? Just the design. This is kind of an aerial view of the proposed bike rack design. And so they'd be set up in clusters of 3 racks, bolted together. They'd be angled about 60 degrees so that the tails of the bikes won't be hanging out into the street. And on each end, there will be some maneuvering space. So once you've parked your bike, well, you can bring your bike in safely off the road, then maneuver your bike to your parking space, and then you can walk around to either end to access the sidewalk. There would be painted lines to delineate the parking area, as well as on each end a curb stop for wheels or a wheel stop, so that cars that would be parallel parking wouldn't accidentally back up too far and park into the facility or hit a bicycle. So the business feedback on the proposed design for option 1 and option 2 with the 12 racks and the 18 racks. Overall, the businesses were overwhelmingly supportive of it and very enthusiastic. General comments from these businesses is that they feel like this is a great location to implement a pilot project, and that the addition of attractive bicycle parking far outweighs the loss of two 15-minute spaces, and some of the concerns were voiced by a couple of the businesses on Canon Perdido, and the basic concerns were that loss of two 15-minute spaces, and these particular businesses rely on the 15-minute zones for their customers to quickly drop off and pick up product. And so there was concerns raised there, and in speaking with them, they felt like a compromise could possibly be made if a 75-minute space were converted into a 15-minute space. And they seemed to be open to that. So if this were to move forward as a pilot project, staff would continue to work with the businesses all together and come to a consensus for the bicycle parking. Both these businesses that expressed concern, they felt that they were supportive of bicycle parking and they wanted bicycle parking, but they just wanted to be sure that the plan worked for everybody on the corner. I also should mention that the Santa Barbara Trust for Historic Preservation, I talked to Dr. Gerald Jackman, who's the executive director there. He has not been able to bring this to his board, but I presented the concept to him and the options, and he was supportive of it, and he didn't see why his board wouldn't support it either. He said he would recommend that they support the project. He said it would be great for visitors that came to the Presidio as a place for them to park their bike. And also all of the feedback from the businesses were detailed in your report. Funding, Public Works has funds available for a pilot project, and it's estimated about $3,000 for the project, and city staff will install the racks. Next steps, if approved to move forward, we'll continue to work with the business owners about the ratio of timed parking in the area, and we would also work to create a maintenance agreement with owners of sweeping of the facility, since where the bike racks will be located, street sweeping will not be able to access the curb there. We'll take the proposal to the Historic Lands Commission for review and also to City Council as well. Circulation element policy that is consistent with this project is policy 4.2. The city shall work to expand, enhance, and maintain the system of bikeways to serve current community needs and to develop increased ridership for bicycle transportation and recreation. And our bicycle master plan is consistent with that, with goal 3, to remove destination barriers by providing support for people and their bicycles once they reach their destination. The recommendation that we have before you tonight is that the Transportation Circulation Committee support the request of the businesses for an on-street bicycle parking bike corral on Canon Perdido Street, alternative 2 specifically, as a trial, and to bring back a progress report to the TCC 1 year after installation for evaluation of continuation of the project. And that's my presentation.
Great.
Any questions?
We actually have 3 public comment slips if we want to do that quickly.
Okay.
So first is Donna Mudge, to be followed by Aaron Olson. Come on up.
Hi, thank you. I've never done this before. I actually thought about this a couple of years ago when I was in Portland, Oregon, and I saw the bike racks, and I was like, my heart started thumping. I was like, I have to talk to somebody. And I actually talked to Eric Loella first, because since he's my composting pilot program person, and I was like, we got to do something. So I'm glad that this is happening. I think it's great for our community. I think it's great for not just the city, but I love being part of the pilot program. And I think it's good for our corner. And I think it's befitting that it would be in front of Handlebar Roasters now. So
Totally.
And I think it'd only do good, and especially since it is on the crosstown corridor. I think that would be a great visual for everybody as well. And I have absolutely no objections to it, so I just want everyone to know that. But it's a feel-good thing, and I think that our corner is a good place to start. So,
awesome. Okay. Well,
thank
thank you so much. All right, Aaron Olson to be followed by Trey Pinner. And if there's anyone else that would like to speak, just submit a comment slip.
Hi, my name's Aaron Olson, and I'm with Handlebar Coffee. Just came tonight. Thanks for your time. Just to show my support in the project, and thanks Sarah for all of her time as well. Mainly just to give my support, similar to others. Spent a lot of time in Portland and seen how successful the program can be, how much it benefits the restaurants or any business on that corner. Also, to be a part of a pilot project in Santa Barbara and be progressive in something that I think can benefit more than just the neighborhood, but the whole city, and will probably grow as it has in many other cities, and would allow many things like the restaurants to have more great seating on the sidewalk for their businesses, and most of the year-round great weather we have. Completely understand the concerns that both Frameworks and Jane Deering Gallery have, which are our neighbors, and we love them. And there's always give or take with everything, but I think they're overall pretty supportive of it. And I mean, we would lose obviously parking for our business, and it's pretty easy to get a cup of coffee in 15 minutes. But I think that the positives outweigh the negatives. So I just came tonight to show our support, and thank you guys for your time.
Great. Thank you so much. All right, Trey Pinner.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Trey Pinner. I represent the property owners for the property that most of these tenants occupy. And first of all, I want to say we're very supportive of the project. As Donna mentioned, who's from the Sojourner, we seem to be the pilot program location. Donna was instrumental in getting the food scraps pilot program started. That was done at Sojourner first, so our property had the first yellow bins in the city. Maybe now we'll have the first bike corral in front. So we're very supportive of the project. Second, I was pleased the other day. I took an opportunity to sort of Google bike corral and look at images, and I was sort of amazed at how many of these bike corrals are around. So obviously it's a product or a use that's getting more and more use, pages and pages of it. So I was very, very pleased with that. I think the only thing I wanted to bring, and I had not had the opportunity to talk with staff about this ahead of time. So I know there was discussion on location, Handlebar being one location, mid-block, and towards the red zone. I possibly have a different opinion that possibly the red zone area is still an area that could be considered for this, or possibly a compromise of shortening the red zone and keeping 3 green, or the green zone possible for 3 parking spaces. And the reason I say that is this red zone is unique in the sense that it's adjacent to Santa Barbara Street, which is a one-way north street. So there is no right-hand turn movement at this location. So I think it is possible that you could shorten your red zone a little bit there and use that red zone for this. But again, I will defer to staff and your comments on that. But I do think you could compromise on that. And there already is the pole bike parking in that area. So you have had bicycle activity happening there at that intersection, and it hasn't been a problem of people entering that area. But this is a different concept, so I understand that. But I do think it could work in that area. I do also mention Councilman House, who is a liaison to your committee, also used to be a tenant of our property there, so he's well aware of the area too, so I hope he's supportive of the project as too. So if you have any questions for me as a property owner, I'll be around tonight. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. Anyone else wishing to speak on the project? All right. So now questions from the committee. Ms. Grant. Mr. Bradley?
Let's see. I just have 2 comments and a question. Yeah, I think it's a very promising project. I hope that the 1-year thing isn't taken too, strictly. If some other neighborhood after 6 months sees this and really wants one, that we don't say, oh, you have to wait a year. So just take that a little bit flexibly. Also, I'm hoping that HLC only gets to weigh in on the aesthetics of them and not the need for the bike corrals, since it doesn't seem like it should be in their purview, but it's not really clear what their purview is usually. Let's see. And one question, sometimes you see at public parking spaces that bikes just get left there abandoned. So how does that get handled at a facility like this?
Sure, that's a great question. Abandoned bikes are definitely something that Santa Barbara sees quite a bit of. In this regard, we would ask the business owners to take initiative to see if they notice a bike that's been abandoned, and we would give them the information of who to call in the police department. And typically, the way that they work is that they flag the bike. That notice that if it doesn't move in a few days, then it will be removed. So there's like a warning that's put on the bike, and then after a certain amount of time, they come back. I believe it's 3 days.
Thanks.
Yes. Oh.
Sorry, thanks. I'm not sure if Mr. Penner could answer this better, but it did occur to me when it showed the bicycles behind the building and for employees, and I just wondered if those employees then would be parking all day in those slots in the front, if in the front of the buildings now. And if that would cause a problem with too many bikes there all day and nobody else getting to park there. Just wondered.
Good question. It's hard to tell. Oh. Yeah, sure.
Thank you for that. There's actually a note on my notes here, which I couldn't read. It's my fifth note. And I got back to my seat and I said, that's what I wanted to talk about. You saw in the picture the bike racks, so there are the older style bike racks that are in the back of our property. Now, our property is currently under a project. It's a approved project, already permitted. We're about halfway done with improvements to that area in the back. And we will be providing new bike parking, which is more consistent with the type of bike parking you're going to see here. It could actually be the same type of rack we could use back there. So I don't think you're going to see the problem of the employees wanting to go out to that rack because the rack out on the street is better than our rack. We'll be putting in racks similar to this or something just as secure, and I don't think that'll be an issue.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. France?
Thank you. So I work for the Santa Barbara Bicycle Coalition, so I'll abstain from voting on this item. One or two kind of factual comments I'll make. One thing that I heard in conversations with some of the business owners, I didn't hear made specific today, was when we're looking at the parking in front of the building, there's really, and Sarah actually mentioned it really well, that 20 feet is kind of a rule of thumb for a car parking space. Well, there's 70 feet, so there's not quite 4 parking spaces. And as I understand it, please correct me if I'm wrong, there are sometimes 4 cars there, and if there are any larger vehicles, there's sometimes only 3 cars there. So just to kind of put a 3.5 number out, put a decimal out for the parking that is to be modified in this project. The second thing I'll make as a comment, and I've heard all the different kind of arguments about the red zone, and Susan Horn just raised the point. Sarah, I'd love if you would give a brief response, but not only the length of the red zone in relation to what's necessary for the traffic movement, but also in terms of the bike crosstown route. One issue that kind of happens with left-hand turners and people passing them on the right is they basically go into the area that you would be parking a car if that were not a red zone. And as a cyclist, they basically take over the space that is your straight line to the bike path across the intersection. And as a cyclist, my perspective on this is, and I don't know the law, but it seems to me that it's not really right for them to be getting so close to the red curb. What would be my, as a cyclist, my straight line. So there's a little bit of a conflict there. Understand the want to get everybody through the intersection on a light signal, but I'm wondering if you could speak to that red light a little bit.
Sure. Yes, it is an illegal movement that you see that's happening there. Leaving it red is not to allow for vehicular movements to go around the people that are making left turns. It's more of a safety for being further back from the intersection, because intersections are where most accidents happen. And so it's for a safety reason that the red zone is there, is my understanding from engineering.
So what is, and you all have 37.5 feet basically designated as the red zone in the project. I'm not sure what it is now. What is the minimum standard for red zone on that type of intersection?
It's 30 feet. And 37.5, as you see listed there in alternative one, is what exists. So in alternative one, with the 12 bicycle parking spaces, the color of the curb would not change.
And I'm saying in alternative 2, you actually reduce down to 30 feet, and 7.5 feet could become green zone, basically giving even a little bit more green zone than alternative 1?
Correct. And as I said, the minimum that was determined by engineering for this particular intersection is 30 feet of red curb. So we have the opportunity to go down to the minimum requirement and add a few more feet and get a few more bicycle parking spaces and retain the number of vehicular parking spaces. Beautiful.
Cool. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right. Mr. Kaufman-Gray?
Let's see. First question. So the bicycle corral design that you showed, that's just I mean, that's what it's going to look like, or is that just a design that before you're going to do more study? Because my question is, you mentioned there's going to be a curb, so when parking, if someone does a parallel parking, they don't run right into bicycles that are there. When you looked at that video from Portland, I know in Santa Barbara we don't want to actually make it look like a corral as far as aesthetics go in the historical district, but it just seems like without having any kind of a curbs, you're looking for possibly a car that could run into the bicycles that are parked there without any kind of a barrier.
Mm-hmm.
And I was wondering, are you just asking for that one barrier for a car that parallels back, or is it going to be a barrier on the alley side of that corral also?
Chair Blackerby, committee member Keith Kaufman-Gray. It's a great question. I did mention there would be on both sides wheel stops.
Okay.
On both sides, on the alley side and on the far side where cars would be parallel parking towards Santa Barbara Street. So there would be a wheel stop, and also there will be reflective markers, likely paddle markers on each end. So in the evening hours, the facility would be illuminated at night.
Okay, that was just my concern. I mean, some drivers aren't the best, and without having a barrier there, someone might, happen to swing over. My other comment is about the two businesses that rely on the 50-minute zones. I can understand that there's a lot of small businesses there, and a lot of those, the two that are mentioned, are in-and-out type business. And there always has been that type of business along there in addition to the restaurant. So I'm a little concerned about the lack of the 15-minute zones. I think this is a great project, and I'm glad it's going forward. But I would think that we should look into more. Maybe that whole section should be 15 minutes. But then also there's the restaurant owner, that they want to have someone be able to eat and park there and be there the whole time too. So I know it's a give and take, but maybe that area should be just 15 minutes, and the other side of the street could be the 75 minutes. That's just a concern I have, and maybe just further discussion with the owners in that area that might relay it. But I have to say, the owner of the building, he just mentioned about moving it at the corner, in and out at that alley. I have to say, pulling in and out is easier than trying to parallel park for 15 minutes. So I kind of, I don't know, but I mean, right now you pull in there, it'd be 15 minutes. It's a lot easier for someone to pull in than having to parallel in and out. And so, but I can see the point of thinking the bike corral would be safer further by the alley. So I mean, I definitely support the bike corral. I'm just not quite sure, maybe you should think about maybe at the other end at the corner too. So.
Sure. As far as the parking goes, on the entire south side of Canon Perdido on the 100 East block is all 15-minute parking on that side. And then there are two 15-minute parking spaces on the north side closest to Santa Barbara Street. So directly across from Julian and Sojourner are two spaces. And then the rest of that block on the north side is 75-minute. As I mentioned in my presentation, one of the suggestions that the Jane Deering Art Gallery came up with, along with Frameworks, is to consider trading off a 75-minute space for a 15-minute space. And they seem to be amenable to the idea. And I preliminarily talked to a few of the other business owners, and they seem to be amenable to that idea as well as a compromise. So if we were to move forward with the pilot project, we would continue to work with all the business owners to come up with a consensus of what to do about the loss of the two 15-minute spaces.
Yeah, that's my concern. I prefer to maybe lose a 75-minute and make it a 15-minute just to help those businesses.
Yeah.
Oh,
great.
Sorry.
Okay. Ms. Rodriguez, any comments? No? Okay. I just want to say I'm really excited about it, and it's great to hear from the business community. You know, I attended a webinar on this type of project, I guess a couple months ago, and it was so interesting to see how other cities, the businesses are the ones that are clamoring for it. I think the waiting list in Portland to get one in front of your business is 75 long or something. It's amazing, unbelievable. I don't think we're quite there yet, but I think it's a really exciting project. I too am hopeful that the Historic Landmarks Commission sees that bicycles are actually far more historic in that area than cars are, than Priuses. So I'm sure we could find some old photos of Canon Perdido that had. Yeah, I'll be there. Do you know when that is actually? When it's going to HLC?
The next available date will be December 5th, and so we'll have to see if we can make it on the agenda on December 5th.
Great. All right. Take note, committee members. Yeah, and Mr. France mentions something that I've experienced. I take that route a lot, and if I'm on my bike, and cars really do that little dance around people to get around cyclists. So maybe if Mr. McGrew is looking for any type of enforcement activities or locations, that's probably full of a lot of sitting ducks. So, yeah, I appreciate the work. I appreciate the community working together. We keep having these projects come for our committee that the community wants, and we can make it work. It's good to see how cheap it is to put it in, and that city staff's going to do it. So, yeah.
I just want to point out to the committee that this is Sarah Grant's last TCC meeting. She's leaving the city at the end of this month. So I just want to acknowledge her for that, because she's been a great employee, and we're sorry to see her leave. But with her leaving, I'm not sure if we'll be able to go to the TCC in December, because I have to assign this to another staff person to continue with this, and I'm not sure the timing of all of that and who I have available to do this, move forward with this project. So
You mean HLC?
So it's moving to the HLC and then eventually the council, as well as overseeing the implementation of those projects. Sarah will do as much as she can before she leaves, but then I have to find somebody to assign it to. So just to let you know that it might not be in December. It might be a few months before we get before the HLC.
Okay, yeah, if we could just be notified as to when that is coming up, and we're sorry to see you go, Sarah. Any other questions or comments? And a motion would be in order on this. Yeah, Mr. Coffin,
Let's see. I move, that TCC supports the request of the businesses for an on-street bicycle parking bike corral on Canon Perdido Street, and that is consistent with the circulation element of the city of Santa Barbara.
And is that alternative 2?
And I'm sorry, and it's alternative 2.
All right. I would second that. Any further discussion on this? All right. So all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions?
Abstain.
1 abstention for Mr. France. Okay. Well, thank you so much. And thank you to everybody who came. All right. Next, as we said earlier, we switched around the items on the agenda. So number 7 got moved up to become new number 6, and we're going to be doing the Las Positas Cliff Drive intersection improvement project first. So.
All right. Thank you, Chair Blackerby and members of the committee. My name is Ashley Hsu, and I'm a project engineer with the city's engineering division. And I'm here tonight to present to you a report on the Las Positas Road at Cliff Drive intersection improvements project. And I'm also joined tonight by John Nowasiak, principal civil engineer, and Derek Rapp from Penfield and Smith, who will be available to answer any questions. The purpose of this intersection improvement project is to improve traffic operations and reduce congestion at the Las Positas Road Cliff Drive intersection, particularly during the AM and PM peak hours. As you may have personally experienced, the southbound Las Positas approach experiences recurring congestion and queuing, particularly during the PM peak hour. And queues on southbound Las Positas have been observed to extend as far as 3,000 feet beyond the intersection, all the way back to the entrance to Ealings Park. This project was originally initiated back in 2001 when the city prepared a project study report, or PSR, which is a Caltrans requirement to do any improvements on the state highway system. This intersection is currently on State Highway 225 and is within Caltrans right-of-way. The PSR evaluated 2 alternatives to address the traffic congestion, including implementation of a traffic signal and a roundabout. The PSR found that both alternatives would cost approximately the same amount to construct, approximately $750,000, and the roundabout was selected as the preferred alternative in the PSR. And because of that selection, there has since been a community expectation that a roundabout would be installed at this intersection at some point in the future. Caltrans approved that PSR back in 2002, and the project was subsequently recommended by SBCAG for $750,000 in State Transportation Improvement Program, or STIP funding. That funding has since been reprogrammed several times due to the state's ongoing financial issues, and the funding is currently programmed for the construction phase of the project only in fiscal year 15-16. During the preparation of the PSR, discussions began between Caltrans and the city about relinquishment of State Route 225 to the city. And this has implications for this project because if the relinquishment were to happen, this project would no longer have to go before Caltrans for review and approval because it would no longer be within the state right-of-way. In January of 2012, Penfield and Smith was hired to prepare preliminary designs and updated cost estimates for the traffic signal and roundabout alternatives in order for staff to make a decision on how to proceed with the project. In May of 2012, City Council gave staff direction to proceed with the relinquishment process for State Route 225, and staff subsequently modified the scope of work with Penfield and Smith to move forward under the assumption that the intersection would at some point be relinquished to the city and Caltrans approval would no longer be required. In October of 2012, Penfield and Smith, along with support from their subconsultant Kittleson and Associates, who are experts in roundabout design, completed the preliminary designs and updated cost estimates for the traffic signal and roundabout alternatives. And staff has also included a third alternative for discussion purposes, which would maintain the always stop control at the intersection and widen southbound Las Positas to include 2 southbound left turn lanes. Currently, the intersection is operating with always stop control. There are stop signs on all approaches, and an overhead flashing red beacon warns of the stop. The southbound approach has one left turn lane and one right turn lane. And as I mentioned previously, the southbound approach experiences the longest delays and queues at the intersection, especially during the PM around 5 o'clock in the afternoon. The overall intersection currently operates at level of service F with over 1.5 minutes of delay, and the southbound approach experiences over 3 minutes of delay during the PM peak and also operates at a level of service F. The AM peak hour also operates at level of service F, but is slightly better in terms of delay, with an overall delay of just about 1 minute. Although the intersection operates deficiently during the AM and PM peak hours, it generally operates acceptably during the rest of the day when traffic volumes are lower. And the crash history at this intersection is consistent with statewide averages for this type of intersection. There are no known safety issues at this location at this time. Under future conditions, a future year of 2035, operations are expected to continue to degrade if no improvements are made, with the overall delay reaching over 3 minutes during the PM peak and the southbound approach experiencing over 5 minutes of delay. One alternative that was considered is maintaining the all-way stop control at the intersection and widening southbound Las Positas to accommodate 2 left turn lanes. This alternative could also include new sidewalks and protected pedestrian crossings at the intersection. Although this alternative would provide a noticeable improvement to operations at the intersection, as well as decreases in delay for the overall intersection as well as the southbound approach, it would still continue to operate at a level of service D during the PM peak, which is considered deficient compared to the city's level of service C minimum standard. This table summarizes the improvement versus the existing conditions. You can see that the overall intersection delay during the PM would be greatly decreased from over 1.5 minutes to about half a minute, and the southbound approach delay would be reduced from over 3 minutes to also about half a minute. However, it would be operating at level of service D. And under future conditions, the level of service would drop back to an F, although delay would still be improved over existing conditions. It would be approximately 1 minute in overall intersection delay and southbound approach delay. From a safety perspective, there could be a potential increased crash frequency with this alternative based on adding a second left turn lane, which increases the number of conflict points at the intersection. Aesthetically, there would be minimal changes since the existing always stop control would remain in place. There would be a minor impact potential to archaeological resources in the area. There is a potential that the roadway widening of Las Positas could shift the southbound approach toward the creek while remaining within what is presumably going to be city right-of-way. But our goal would be under this alternative to achieve the roadway widening on the east side of the road so that it would not be getting any closer to the creek. This alternative would result in a net increase of approximately 700 square feet of impervious surface due to the roadway widening. The construction cost estimate for this alternative is $370,000 with a total project cost of $460,000. However, this alternative is unlikely to be eligible to use the STIP funding that's available because it would not improve the level of service above the city's minimum standard, which, if that is the case, would leave an unfunded amount of $460,000. The project could be scaled back to eliminate the roadway widening and the sidewalk improvements by simply doing some restriping and modifications to the existing pork chop island that is there. so that the cost would be greatly reduced. However, the operational improvement would also be reduced. The next alternative would be the installation of a new traffic signal at the intersection, while also widening southbound Las Positas to accommodate 2 left turn lanes. This alternative would include new sidewalks with protected pedestrian crossings at the intersection. As you can see in this table, the traffic signal would have a significant benefit to the operations at the intersection. The overall PM intersection delay would drop from over 1.5 minutes down to about 12 seconds, and the southbound approach would drop from over 3 minutes to about 15 seconds, with the intersection operating at an acceptable level of service B. Under future conditions, the signal would be expected to continue operating at a level of service B. In terms of safety, there would be a negligible change from stop-controlled scenarios. Aesthetically, there would be urban elements added, which would include the new traffic signal poles and the sidewalk improvements. There would be a minor impact potential to archaeological resources in the area. And similar to the previous alternative, there could be the potential of shifting the southbound approach toward the creek if the widening cannot be accommodated on the east side of the road. There would also, under this scenario, be a net increase of 700 square feet of impervious surface. And the total construction cost for this alternative is estimated at $625,000, which would be fully covered by the $750,000 in STIP funding that's available. The total project cost is estimated at $780,000, which, because there's no funding currently identified for the environmental and final design phase of the project, would leave a $155,000 total project funding shortfall. And the $750,000 in STIP funding can only be used for the construction phase. Finally, a single-lane roundabout was also analyzed for this intersection. It would include new multi-purpose pathways, which would be shared by pedestrians and bicyclists, and this would provide bicyclists with the option to either travel through the roundabout as a vehicle, which is legal, or to use the off-street paths, depending on how comfortable they feel navigating through a roundabout. The roundabout would provide uncontrolled pedestrian crossings where vehicles are required to yield to pedestrians, but the crossings would be shorter than the other alternatives we've evaluated. The roundabout provides the most improvement in delay of the alternatives that were evaluated. Similar to the signal, the level of service would be improved to a B. The overall delay would be down to about just under 11 seconds, with the southbound approach delay down to about 12 seconds. Under future conditions, the roundabout would be expected to continue operating at level of service B during the PM peak. The safety would be impacted by reducing the potential for severe high-speed and right-angle crashes due to the changes in the geometry that would be required in order to implement a roundabout at this intersection. Aesthetically, there could be improved opportunities for creating a gateway effect for the city with this alternative. Similar to the other alternatives, there would be a minor impact potential to archaeological resources. And the roundabout could shift the footprint of the intersection toward the creek at the northwesterly corner. However, all the improvements would be made within the public right-of-way, and every effort will be made to minimize any type of impact to the creek. The roundabout would result in a net decrease of impervious surface of about 9,000 square feet. The total construction cost for this alternative is estimated at $1.32 million, The $750,000 of STIP construction funding could be applied to that, which would leave a $570,000 construction shortfall. And the total project cost is estimated at $1.65 million, which would result in a $900,000 total project funding shortfall. This table is a little hard to read, but it's included in your staff report, and it compares the existing conditions with the three alternatives we've evaluated and all of the impacts. You can see that the traffic signal and the roundabout both significantly improve operations at the intersection, with the roundabout reducing delay slightly more than the traffic signal, but not by too much. In summary, the intersection improvements are needed in order to improve traffic operations, reduce queuing at the intersection, especially during the PM peak. The roundabout was previously selected in 2002 as the preferred alternative, and we have since done some updated cost estimating to determine how to move forward. As I've mentioned, there are $750,000 of STIP funds available for the construction phase. And just to quickly recap, the always stop control with the widening of southbound Las Positas alternative results in a $460,000 project shortfall if indeed the STIP funding cannot be applied for that alternative. The traffic signal would result in a total project shortfall of $155,000, and the roundabout total project shortfall would be $900,000. And it is worth noting that city staff continuously pursues all available grant funding for city projects. Unfortunately, the majority of the funding right now that's available is focused on safety improvements, and because this intersection doesn't have an elevated crash occurrence and frequency, it's not eligible for that type of funding. So we do continue to seek all available grant funding. And that concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, and I just want to see if we had any public comment on this item. No. All right, yeah, Mr. Kaufman-Gray?
Yeah, I just have one question before comments. So the STIP funding isn't for either 2015 to 2016? Is that correct?
That's when it's programmed for, so that is when it would be available to us.
Okay. So we're looking at costs in 2012. I mean, you're looking at a 3-year period. Wouldn't all these costs be going up between now and then by the time you get the money?
That's a great question. We have included a 20% contingency in our estimates to account for increasing
Okay, so the
potential for
figures you see
increasing
there
costs.
is add with the 20% increase?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Mr. Rodriguez, did you have? Oh, okay. Mr. Bradley?
A few questions. Back in 2001, it was estimated that the traffic signal in the roundabout would cost the same, and now the roundabout is twice as much. So I'm just wondering what changed between those studies.
That's also a good question. Since that time, we've gained a lot more experience in constructing roundabouts, and so everyone is more experienced with creating cost estimates for roundabouts, and that was that's one component of why we've been able to kind of hone our cost estimate now. For comparison's sake, I don't know if you've seen it yet, but the city of Goleta recently constructed a roundabout at Los Carneros and Cayo Real, which is a similar intersection. It's a T intersection, a single lane roundabout. Their engineer's estimate was $1.4 million for construction, and the low bid came in at $1.25. So we feel that our current estimate is on target with what we can expect.
Okay. And also, it was mentioned that if we wait till the city takes over the route, that doesn't have to go through Caltrans review. So what's the cost difference or cost savings of not having to go through that stage?
We've estimated about a 25% savings on the design phase. just because there's so much time required for coordination with Caltrans staff. So that's the savings we've estimated on the design side. We don't expect too much of a savings on construction because the standards for construction are pretty consistent between Caltrans and the city.
Okay. Would this project be subject to the Complete Streets guidelines? I know you mentioned a couple times about not putting in the sidewalk improvements or something, but is that actually consistent with Complete Streets guidelines to do that? Or?
I am not sure about that. I would have to look into it. If we were to do some sort of scaled back improvement, it would likely be considered some sort of interim improvement while we attempt to secure more funding for a more permanent improvement.
Okay. Well, let's see. One more question. Just wondering. At one time, I think it was envisioned that the Veronica Meadows project would pay for some of this. Are there any other things on the horizon like that?
Nothing that I have heard of.
Okay.
I suppose there's the potential, but I haven't heard of anything.
Okay, that's it.
Right. Other questions or comments? One thing that I just want to note that I kind of didn't realize would happen, but I think is exciting in the roundabout alternative is the net decrease of 9,000 square feet of impervious surface, especially in that area, in that watershed. I think would be a really exciting thing. And yeah, so that was something I didn't even think of. It looks like the other two, there's an increase of 700 square feet. So
yes,
just
one thing
so
to note.
staff is looking for the feeling of the committee whether or not which of these three alternatives we should be pursuing. Just understand, though, in either case, especially with the roundabout option, we'd have to go after additional funding. I have talked to staff at Santa Barbara County Association of Governments, and they would assist us in looking for funding. But in terms of STIP and RSTP funds that typically we would be looking at, like augment the STIP funding for this, those monies are already committed to the 101 HOV lane project for a number of years. So we would have to be looking at other funds like transportation enhancement or other type funds like that. So, so funding the additional $900, almost $1 million to do a roundabout will be a difficult task, and it might push out further the construction of this project. So, we're just kind of looking for feedback from the committee as to what your preferred option would be.
Well, I have another question too of possible funding. I'm just like trying to, think of possible ways to make it work. Because of that, the biologically, sensitive area that's over there, if it was a project that, with reduction of that square footage of impervious surface, was found to be enough of an environmental benefit for the area or something like that, or if there could be some other project that would mesh with that. I don't know. I know generally those things don't mesh with transportation, but it's at least something to look into because obviously a lot of work has been done in that area. So just maybe a thought. Who knows? Mr. Kaufman-Gray?
Well, I guess it's more of a comment. My preferable option would be the roundabout, which was decided quite a few years ago. But if it doesn't look like we're going to be able to get the money, it looks like the signal is the next viable as far as reducing the level of service getting it back down to a B level, which is below the city requirement of a C level. The first option that you mentioned doesn't make really any improvement in that area, so I don't think that's not even on the table. I'm glad you brought it forward because I'm sure people would say, why don't you just do that? And it's obvious that it really wouldn't help our level of service in that area. But I hate to say, yes, let's wait for the roundabout, and then we never have the funding, and the neighbors in that area are just going to get more frustrated as years go by that the traffic is going to get worse and worse. So even though I like the roundabout as number one, my leaning would be, let's go ahead and do the traffic signal if you cannot get that extra funding.
Yeah, Mr. Bradley.
So the funding's scheduled for 4 years from now, and we don't really know when the city is going to take control of the highway. So what's the hurry for making the decision now? Is how long, since there's no funding for the option that people want, how long can you delay the decision without delaying the project? I guess that's my question.
Well, we would like to move forward and finalize the design as quickly as possible, so it is ready to go out to bid once we do take control of the 225. And I believe we're looking about a year and a half for that process to be complete before this intersection becomes a city facility.
Okay.
You know, understanding too, continue to push it off. We've been getting very good bids, but as the economy starts to improve, contractors aren't going to be as hungry for work, and we're going to start seeing our bid prices starting to creep up.
I would say, I mean, my preferred alternative would be the roundabout. I mean, I don't know if we're more supposed to be, people looking at transportation needs and what's best for circulation, or like, budget, being the fiscal guardians here. So I would, for me anyway, I would say the preferred alternative would be the roundabout. I mean, obviously the first alternative is that's not going to happen. And I just can imagine 2 southbound turn lanes with an all-way stop would be like not pretty. It would be ugly there. So, I mean, I guess what I'm wondering is, obviously you guys are going after funds every chance you get, looking into these things, but if we end up preferring the roundabout, at what point, can we give direction of like, at what point do we have to pull the plug and go, it's just not going to happen for that, so move forward with the traffic signal. And I mean, we're going to talk about our CIP in a little bit, but I don't know where that falls into, and we can't really predict what's going to happen with the economy. So,
well, that's a good question. I would have to sit down with the engineering staff on that. Certainly we could say, hey, we'll spend the next 6 months or a year working with SBCAG staff to see if we can find additional funding to do that, and John's going to step up too. But at some point in time, we have to make a decision to move forward with a project.
Yeah. Madam Chair, John Wasik, Principal Civil Engineer, Public Works. Just to follow up on Committee Members Bradley's comment about being 4 years away, it really isn't, because when we talk about this year as fiscal year 13, July 1 becomes fiscal year 14, and we're talking about fiscal year 16. So it's not that far away, and we have an environmental process to go through, design process to go through. So while we have some time, and we would certainly be looking at funding, we don't have the luxury of a lot of time in the number of years. So just wanted to keep that all in perspective.
And to go through the environmental process, it's best to decide which project we're going to do, and not try and go through it with 2 different possible options. Otherwise, the cost for that is going to escalate as well. So, at some point in time, we're going to have to make the decision. We're going to do the roundabout, do a traffic signal. If we decide we're going to do the roundabout, then we're going to probably have to push the STIP funding out. But this is really old STIP money, and just so the committee knows, the reason it's taken so long to get to this point is because of the state budget issue. They have not had STIP funds available in the years that we thought we were going to do the project. So we continue to push this out. We're now in a position now where the city's looking at taking over this intersection as being a city road and get this project built, whether it be a signal or a roundabout.
Okay. So I would also, it's a shame because I know it's such an active community that there aren't people here from the neighborhood telling us what they want, the people who sit in that queue all evening. So that kind of makes it harder. So if you're at home watching, let us know. Let city staff know what you're, how you're feeling. But so that kind of makes it a little tougher. But, I would say as far as what the preferred alternative is, I would feel like it would be the roundabout. Go after the funding if you can, and at whatever time you deem like we gotta pull the trigger, then to go towards the signal. Does anyone in the committee have feelings about any of these things? Yes. Yeah, Ms. Horn. Could you turn on your? Yeah.
I live on the Mesa and I sit in the queue often, and I really think it's something that should be done sooner rather than later. And the roundabout would be nice, and it's definitely the preferred thing. But I think it's not worth waiting years, for it. And I think if going ahead will reduce that, minutes to seconds, it's just so worth it to go ahead, I think, just in my opinion, with the traffic signal. So.
Mr. France?
Chair Blackerby and staff, so to clarify, between the alternative of the traffic signal with 2 lanes and the roundabout, after STIP funds, in the traffic signal, the city would have to come up with $155,000. And for the roundabout, the city would have to come up with $900,000. Is that correct?
Correct.
So for the 6-year CIP that we're looking at, we'd basically be looking at that difference after STIP funding. And part of the concern is, could we come up with the $900,000? Or could we even come up with $155,000? Okay.
Yes.
Ms. Was that everything? Okay. Ms. Rodriguez?
Yeah, when I read this, I was so excited till I got to the dollars. I thought, well, what? This is a no-brainer. I mean, and then I got to the dollars. And I lived on the Mesa for a number of years, and I live in Hidden Valley and go to Hendry's Beach, Arroyoboro Beach quite frequently. My husband bicycles down there regularly. So, of course, the roundabout would be my preferred alternative. And I also, I'm frustrated because millions of dollars have been spent on the restoration of the creek, and having used that beach for the last 40 years, it's so wonderful now. And a roundabout would aesthetically be so much better than a traffic signal or any changes. And I know the traffic is increasing over time, but people have lived with a stop sign at Las Positas for over 50 years. I would have to go with the approach of putting it off as long as possible, because I think aesthetically it would be so much better. And it's a major tourist beach, and that is a real gateway intersection, in my opinion, to the beachfront of our city. So I just want to add that to the comments.
So is there any kind of motion we think we might be able to put together up here? Yeah, Mr. Bradley? Oh, okay. Yeah, come on up. We know your name, but we can take you.
Item number 6 now. I was here obviously for item 5,
All right,
but I didn't
Trey
know.
Penner.
Trey Penner. I didn't know this was going to be on the agenda. I held back on my public comment. But I will add to that. I work on the Mesa. I've gone and I live in San Roque. And I've been doing that for 22 years. So I've been through the Las Positas intersection twice a day, at least for 5 days a week for 22 years. And I can say to you from going to that area, I know you're going to have a tough time with the economics. And I deal with some city stuff too, so I understand the problem you're dealing with CIPs. But I would highly encourage you to look at the roundabout as the preferable alternative for that area, because I do think the aesthetics, and as well as the operational benefits there, would be superior to the signal. I'm not sure at the end of the day. I know what the traffic study shows, but I'm not sure the signal would generate the positive impact that the roundabout. I'm a huge proponent of roundabouts. I'm on the Coast Village Business Association. I think the roundabout over there is one of the best things ever done. So I think you'd find the same impact at this intersection as well. Thank you.
Thank you. I was, thank you. And we have another silent Mesa guy just hanging out back there. he seems to sometimes weigh in on transportation issues on the Mesa, but
Jeff King, member of the Mesa Architects, Mesa resident. I'd say the vast majority of the comments that we get from the public through our means have been supportive of the roundabout concept. I think the other thing you need to consider is that with a roundabout, and this is probably difficult for you in the Public Works to quantify, but you're going to see reduced air pollution, reduced fuel use. Traffic is going to move smoother. Lights will help, certainly, and they're going to reduce the waiting time, but you're going to have stop and go, stop and go. And I think that's a significant thing to consider in favor of the roundabouts. So I think your point about it being a gateway to that portion of the community is really important, too. Roundabout can be a significant aesthetic improvement to that intersection. And environmentally, in terms of less pervious surfaces, impervious surfaces is an important factor also. So I'd say you can count on a significant portion of Mesa residents supporting that that solution over the traffic light or the additional traffic lanes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks. Could you fill out a slip on your way out so they don't yell at me? Okay. Well, thank you for weighing in. Appreciate it. So here we are. Yeah, Mr. Bradley.
Yeah, I'm a Mesa resident too, but I'm lucky enough to not have to drive through there at the peak hour. In the off-peak, a roundabout would be faster than a signal.
Yeah.
Which is another advantage. So I think a motion which was something about like what you were saying would be to keep the roundabout as a preferred alternative for another, 9 months or so, and look for further funding sources and revisit it at that point. That would be a motion.
I'll second that.
Okay. I have a question about that. I don't know if the 9 months is like an arbitrary thing. It is, but I don't know what I guess that's what I'm looking for direction on. I don't want to delay anything that
I
might
like the
end up
motion
happening, but-
because it has to come back to us after 9 months if the funding hasn't come up, so then we can decide then.
Was that part of the motion, Mr. Bradley?
Sure.
Okay.
I won't be on. I won't be here.
You won't be here. You can come give public comment. Mr. Allen, I know we want to move forward. I don't know what the total timeline is. I know that 15-16 is around the corner. I was thinking more. Sorry.
Let us 6 months or sooner, or whatever. Basically, what we would do, if that's what the committee votes on, John and I would sit down with the SBCAG staff to see, okay, now what is the possibility of getting additional funding, whether it be things now called alternative modes, the old TE funds. What's the possibility of getting $500,000 or $900,000 of those funds to go towards this project? We can explore that and see what other funding opportunities there are out there that we could go towards this, and how quickly would we be able to assemble the money to do it. And if he said, hey, it's going to take 3, 4, 5, 6 years to put together a funding package to do the roundabout, then that might not be the best solution, and we'll come back to say, we've talked to them, can't put the funding together in a timely manner, and our recommendations going forward with the signal.
Right. So could we maybe amend that to 6 months? Are you open to that?
Sure.
Sure.
We can give you
And
a
they
status-
will move with all deliberate speed.
Status report in 6 months.
Status report in 6 months. That would be great. So, any other discussion on that motion?
Yeah. Is there even the possibility of having the roundabout construction be done in phases that would somehow reduce the expenditures or spread them out over time?
Obviously, we can look to see if there's ways to trim costs off of it. Maybe we don't do the Class 1 multi-purpose facilities for the bikes and peds. That might save some money. I'm not sure how much we're looking at saving by doing something like that. We can challenge Derek Penfield Smith to see what he can come up with, but I'm not sure we're going to be seeing a lot in terms of savings. So the biggest, so no matter what we look at, whether we save $100,000 or $300,000, we still have to come up with a lot of money to deliver a roundabout. So, right. I think the motion is understood. We can go out and we'll talk to SPCAG staff and see what the possibility of being able to get additional funding. And if we find out pretty quickly, we'll be back before the committee. Doesn't mean we're not going to wait for 6 months to come back to committee if we know the answer is going to take us 5 years or whatever to get the additional funding.
Great. Okay. Yeah, Mr. France.
Chair Blackerby, one last comment I'd like to make. I think all of us empathize so much with the need to speed up traffic on the PM peak hour. One comment I'll make is in terms of bike routes, vehicle commuters trying to avoid this intersection are going to use all the other routes onto the mesa. And I often use probably one of the most dangerous suggested bike routes in the city, which is going up Calle Cañon and then down Flora Vista. You get to avoid, I know, it's a bear. And of course, the fewer peak hour vehicles trying to go on that route, the safer that is as an alternate route. Again, not the best route in the city by any stretch, but I think we just need to hunker down, and if the roundabout is the favored option, find the money.
Yeah.
As a resident on Calle Cañon, I would be very happy for the roundabout to go, so maybe it wouldn't have as much traffic up on Calle Cañon.
Am I the only person that has never lived on the Mesa? I think that might be the case. Man. All right. Okay. Councilmember House, come on up.
Grant House from the City Council and your assistant liaison tonight, and Kathy just came in. Not to affect your decision, but to say what I believe would be helpful to the City Council as this moves forward. And I know staff is going to really want to hear what you're saying here, but please let us know what you really do prefer. What is it you prefer, the money aside even? Because the money, that's up to staff to do the very best they can to assemble that, and up to us and City Council to be able to appropriate it, all the rest of it. But the point is that what is it that you feel would be the best solution here? And then we'll deal with the aftermath if it really doesn't become feasible. That would be coming back to you for an alternative discussion. I think that's what you're including in your motion, but it would be really important for us to hear what you want and why, and what you feel would be the very best thing. So that's all. I just want to get you down
for
to
that.
Thank you.
Okay, so we've had discussion. Any more discussion before we take a vote on the motion? All right. So all those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? All right. There's your unanimous recommendation, and staff will look under all the couch cushions they can for.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Ashley. Okay, so we are going to move on to our final agenda item. Number 7, review of the proposed 2014 to 2019 6-year capital improvement program. Mr. Wozniak is here with us.
Good evening, Madam Chair, committee members. John Owasiak, Principal Civil Engineer for the Public Works Department, Streets Capital Manager. And I'm here today to talk to you about our Streets Capital Improvement Plan budget, proposed budget for fiscal year 14. And we've given a significant amount of information to you in our staff report and attachments, so I'm going to walk you through that.
Thank you.
Please don't be too intimidated by it. I know it's a lot of information, but I'd like to start with an overview, or the outline of my presentation. And I'm going to have an overview of the Streets Capital Program and the issues. And then we're going to talk about the program funding priority categories. And we've developed a prioritization matrix as well. And then we'll walk you through the proposed fiscal year 14 Streets Capital Improvement Project budget and talk about next steps. So today's work session purpose. Today will be, we want to obtain the Transportation Circulation Committee and public review and comment on our proposed budget. And it goes back to the circulation element for this requirement is that prior, and I'll read it, quote it, which is prior to each annual adoption of the capital improvement program, public works sessions shall be held with the Planning Commission and the City Council to develop project priorities for funding. And of course, that was written before the TCC became the TCC.
Right.
And so, of course, we're going to include the TCC and seek the TCC input and comment. So it's an overview. There's a limited amount of funding. That's one of the bottom lines the realities that we're faced with. And so we have a new 6-year capital improvement program report, and you've been given a draft of the Streets Capital 6-year capital improvement report. There are 88 projects identified in that report, and it's a tool that we use for identifying the Streets Capital improvement needs in the city for city budget process. But it's not the only tool that we use, and it is only a period of 6 years, but it includes projects that are anticipated beyond 6 years. So we call it the 6-year because every 6 years every 2 years we have typically a 6-year capital program, but the council adopts the budget annually, every year. And so what you'll see before you is the fiscal year 14 proposed budget. There are competing project priorities, and we do have input from other sources. Of course, we're going to be going to the Planning Commission. We have neighborhood meetings with, say, the Neighborhood Task Force, Access Advisory Committee meetings. We have many sources of information available to us to assist us with these types of analysis, including our pavement management system report. We have bridge preventive maintenance reports and a lot of infrastructure recordation to help us determine the needs and priorities. We have an emphasis on safety and maintaining our existing infrastructure. Again, we have the 6-year capital improvement report, and we'll be going through next steps. And ultimately, we'd be looking at the City Council approving a budget typically in the end of June. I'd like to talk about our funding sources for this program. The Measure A, which was passed in November of 2008, passed by a very large margin, and it's a 30-year measure, and it's a significant revenue stream for the city and the Streets Capital program. And the Measure A component for the Streets Capital is approximately $600,000, and I'll get into a little more detail of that soon. Then we have the utility user tax and state gas tax, and I'll also get into more detail of that component. But a significant component of the Streets Capital component is really the grant funds. So what I'll want to work with you tonight on is the discretionary amounts, the Measure A and the UUT, but a real important component is also the grant funds. It's actually a much larger component of the budget, but it's for designated purposes. And so what we want some comments from you are on the discretionary portion, that Measure A and UUT portion. So about 5 or so years ago, staff developed some priority categories. So we wanted to qualify how some of these funds should be spent. And so we came up with some of this criteria. Projects that have significant consequences if they were not constructed would be a high priority, or if we didn't maintain infrastructure. Examples of that would certainly be the pavement program, where we want to try and keep up with the pavement so that it doesn't deteriorate to a point where it would cost us significantly more. It's also a high priority to fund safety improvements, and the need for that has been increasing, and so we are trying our best to be responsive to safety projects. And generally maintaining existing infrastructure before funding new improvements. So we certainly want to allow enough maintenance funds for maintaining existing infrastructure, and that's a high priority. Another category would be to maximize leveraging of city discretionary funds through grants. A great example of that would be our bridge program, where we have occasionally we get 100% grant where there's no city match. We have a couple of bridges that we will be getting 100% grant funds. So of course that's great, but then there are also federal highway program bridges that have a requirement for some grant fund match by the city, typically in the 11.5% range. And city policy improvement projects are also important. We're always looking for ways to build our sidewalk infill program, other improvement projects. So we're always looking for ways to get the job done. This slide wasn't intended for us to spend much time on, just to give you an example of how we have developed a quantitative analysis. The prior slide was the qualitative analysis, and about 3 years ago, with comments from the TCC and the Planning Commission, we developed a quantitative analysis, and it has categories of projects: exposure, cost deferral, project delivery, leverage, city policy, and then there's a multiplier, and then there's points assigned. So it's rather complicated, but at least it was a tool that we had used to see how the qualitative analysis matched up with a quantitative analysis. And that was taken to as a matter of fact, this was brought to the TCC back in September of 2010, and we did receive feedback from the TCC on this analysis. And we did make some changes as a result of the TCC input. I don't believe we made any subsequent changes. I believe that since those initial changes were made, we've left it at, and maybe we need to revisit this again, because I'll show you in a minute why I'm saying that is because when you apply that quantitative analysis, here's page 1 of 3. These are the 88 projects that gone through that analysis, and you see that the colored lines are the ones that are proposed for funding. The yellow means that it is the discretionary, that Measure A or UUT funding. The green mix says that it's the grant funding, and then the blue is a combination of city discretionary funding and grant funding. And then you see the white, and those are the projects that are not recommended for funding, and you see a few at the very top. So that may give us an indication that this quantitative analysis, that we may need to make some adjustments, because if a few of them are at the top and we're unable to fund them, it seems like there need to be some adjustments. Here's page 2, and you can see that there's a little more white, and then compare that to page 3. So to some degree, the quantitative analysis is working. I think what I'm seeing is that it would need some tweaking. And staff will be working at that, and we'd likely bring that back to the TCC on future meetings. So here's the heart of the issue today, which is the draft of the fiscal year 14 discretionary or non-grant fund streets capital project. There's a list of 15 projects here on this list. Last year's approved fiscal year 13 budget had 12 projects, so we have 3 additional projects added to the list. The differences from last year is that the traffic signal maintenance and improvements amount has gone from $150,000 to $190,000. Our street light maintenance has changed from last year from $50,000 to $100,000. There's a greater need for maintenance on the street lights. And then the 3 new projects for fiscal year 14 that weren't on the list for fiscal year 13 are bridge preventative maintenance. We've recommending $75,000 for that. Maybe I can get this arrow going. There we go. $75,000 for that project. Access to Cottage Hospital, I'll elaborate that in a minute, for $115,000. And then the De La Vina Arriaga intersection improvements for $15,000, and that's just seed money to start applying for another grant. And so this is the total here of approximately $3.5 million. That was the amount of the adopted budget in fiscal year 13. So that's our starting point for the fiscal year 14 until we have better revenue projections. And so that's how we typically start our budget process, is whatever revenues that were approved for the previous years, that was the starting point for us. And these will likely change as our revenue estimates get updated. And so with the increase of some of the monies to the projects I mentioned, that had to come from somewhere. It's a zero-sum game. When we have the same number from fiscal year 13 that we're using in 14, where did that money come from? And the difference was made up in pavement maintenance. In fiscal year 13, we had allocated $2.48 million to pavement maintenance, and in fiscal year 14, that number has dropped to $2.12 million. So starting with, I'd like to get into, or at least discuss briefly, these projects that we're recommending for the fiscal year 14 budget. So pavement maintenance. Earlier this year, I made a presentation to the City Council on the pavement maintenance update, and it was sobering. It was very challenging. It was difficult. And I can tell you, since that time, our information has shown that it's gotten significantly more challenging. So at that time, I told Council that in order for us to achieve the pavement condition index, and that's the rating of the roads, it's rated from 0 to 100, 100 being a brand new road of newly laid asphalt, 0 being a dirt road where the asphalt is deteriorated to the point where it's dirt. So when I reported to the Council earlier this year, it was the pavement condition index was then at about a 68, and that's from information that has been gathered from a year or two old report, because there's an analysis of the roads that's done. We do we survey a third of the roads in the city every year, so that in 3 years we capture the ratings of the road, the conditions of the road. So we've gone from a pavement condition index of 68 to 63, and one of the reasons for that is that pavement deteriorates more significantly over time. It's a curve, and as you go further down the curve, the steeper the curve gets. And we're not alone. This is a situation where funding has been limited. We, the city, are not alone. The funding has been limited throughout the state, and the state average is about where the city is at too, and the city and the county and many other municipalities are in the same position. And so an example of what I'm talking about is that the city has a goal of maintaining our city pavement at a level of service, condition level of 70. So when the rating was 68, we had estimated that it would be approximately $4.7 million a year to bring the pavement condition level up to a 70. And at a 70, you can maintain the roads at a very cost-effective way by slurry sealing them. That's that thin layer that goes on the roads that seals and preserves the surface and restores it. People call it an overlay, but it's not. The overlay is the much beefier, thicker asphalt pavement. We've done a little bit of overlay on Miggs Road recently, ground and overlaid, because it got to the point where it deteriorated such that we needed to take a more proactive measure on that road treatment. Now, at a point of time on the curve today where we are at a 63, we've now estimated the pavement cost to be about $12.7 million a year in the next 6 years to bump it up to a 70. So I think the train has left the station on that. We don't have that type of money. And so what we are seeing here is an amount of pavement monies that we have historically used. So we're trying to maintain the historical amount of money to the pavement condition program, and we will be working with the council and working on alternatives to find a funding source for our pavement management program. So sorry to elaborate that too much, very much, but it's a significant issue for our Streets Capital program, and I just wanted to let you know that the need is much greater than the amount that we have. Moving on to Punta Gorda Bridge. Punta Gorda Bridge replacement is part of the lower Sycamore Creek. By the way, it's number 25 of 89 in your packet, if you did want to have a look at the project page. And it's part of the lower Sycamore Creek near the 101, Highway 101. And we were very fortunate last year to get a Disaster Recovery Initiative grant in the amount of $2.5 million. And we do need some city funds to complete the total project cost. And so we're moving forward with this project, and the construction of this project is slated for the summer of 2013. So pleased to report that that's moving along. And we did have $100,000 funded for this last year, and we do need another $100,000, and that would complete the funding for that bridge to be constructed next summer. The next item, traffic signal maintenance, and this is where we have for our traffic signals, we have our battery backup, cabinet upgrades, LED replacements, et cetera, and we typically fund this at about $75,000 a year, and we will plan to continue to do so. The next project being the bridge preventative maintenance. A few years ago, about 3 years ago, we did a consultant contract to analyze our 70 bridges. Not all of the bridges are eligible for federal grant funding, and we still do need to maintain our bridges. So we've had a report done, and it was, I'm pleased to report that generally our bridges are in pretty good condition, but they do need some maintenance. And so we were able to get a federal grant in the amount of $437,000, I believe a year or two ago. And so we do need to have some matching monies for the staff costs and for other administrative costs. And so we have programmed $75,000, and we're planning for construction of 7 bridges, or the maintenance construction for 7 bridges starting in January, February of 2013 on the Hollister, Mission, Arriaga, Carrillo State, East Yananali, and East Cabrillo bridges. So there are 7 bridges that we are going out to bid shortly, and we'll have that construction work just after the new year. The next item is streetlight maintenance. And there's an increasing need to paint poles, especially down near the waterfront area or on the mesa where they're more subject to the adverse climate. And so there are also knockdowns that occur when accidents happen and the like. And so we fund this as needed. And so so we do, I think we funded it last year at $50,000. We monitor it, and we only replenish it as the need arises for the replenishment. So again, maintenance is important. Next item, drainage maintenance program. We typically fund this at approximately $100,000 a year. We have a very long list of drainage improvements and drainage concerns and complaints that we receive, and so we allocate $100,000 every year to address the top priorities. And then we also typically have some unexpected occurrences during the rain season, and it's upcoming here, and we do sometimes get these worn out or washed out corrugated metal pipe, or these pipes that have been in the ground for, say, 50 plus years. They've corroded, and then they surface at times, or we find them. They find us. So we do allocate that, and that's typically the amount that we would spend in a fiscal year. The next item, streets engineering. This is a staff costs for administration of the Streets Capital Program. It includes survey for monitoring these some points in the city where we have some land movement, or needs to preserve survey monuments. Sometimes they get wiped out inadvertently due to construction and the like. So we do have also in this item, we have coordination with Caltrans. We have Streets Capital programming, such as these events here for budgeting purposes and the like. So we do allocate for the resources. And including the $150,000 is approximately $40,000 for conceptual, $50,000 for conceptual scoping of upcoming or new projects or grant opportunities as well in here. So I work closely with Browning, and we manage this money. We end up spending it all every year. Sidewalk maintenance. Sidewalk maintenance is a very high priority for the department. We want to make sure that our sidewalks and the uplifts are being taken care of, the cracks and the like, so that we can minimize any trip and falls. And so we want to be in compliance with ADA, et cetera. So we do allocate approximately $250,000. I think we used to fund this at about $400,000 before the reductions in the funding started happening. So we're trying to keep this alive at maintenance at $250,000 a year. Going into infrastructure improvements, Lower Mission Creek flood control. We're going gangbusters on our Lower Mission Creek flood control project. The county is working on the reaches. They're currently working at the box culvert near the railroad tracks. And our city staff coordinates with the county and the Army Corps of Engineers on the projects. The city is working on replacing the bridges with federal grant funds. The county is working on between the bridges, called the reaches, and we're making significant progress. The county flood control project has constructed the Reach 1A down by the State Street Bridge. In the spring of 2013, we'll be initiating the construction of the Chapala-Yananali intersection bridge near the railroad station. And the following year, we're scheduled for the Mason and the Coda bridges. And let's not forget about Cabrillo Bridge, which we are trying desperately to get out to construction, with a target date of this early summer or midsummer. It's really complicated with the right-of-way process. As you may know, the Rusty's Pizza building is physically attached to the bridge, and there's significant right-of-way issues to deal with that project. So that coordination is necessary. Sidewalk access ramps. So that's we try and get as many access ramps as we can afford to be done, and we do need to meet our Americans with Disability Act guidelines. And so, unfortunately, we don't have more money to attribute to this, but we do feel it's important enough to continue with funding this. $100,000 gets us approximately 10 to 12 ramps a year. Sometimes we bank money so that we can get a bigger bang for our buck, so that we can design maybe over a 2-year period of time. But it's definitely in accordance with our master plan and ADA transition plan. It's a high priority for us. The next item is the corridor improvement, the access to Cottage Hospital. That one is 29. I'm sorry, I haven't been giving you the pages. This is page 29. And so the environmental impact report for the Cottage Hospital Seismic Compliance and Modernization Project required a project study report. And the phase 1 of that circulation options report has been completed, and the phase 2 is moving ahead. And so there has been a contribution by the developer of $250,000. We've received $110,000, and we would be receiving the balance being $140,000, and that we would need a city match of about $115,000 for us to take the next step in the phase of the PSR process. Do you want to elaborate on that one, Brian?
Yeah, and the reason we need additional funding, one is to pay for the additional cost for the consultant, but the primary reason is now Caltrans requires public agencies to pay for their costs to review the project study report, so that's why we need additional funding for this. But in order for us to go after potential outside grant funding to actually do the project, we need to have the project study report completed and approved by Caltrans. So it puts us in line to be able to compete for primarily federal funds to do this project.
The next line item.
Actually, Chair Blackerby, can I ask a question? Real quickly, following down, is the $13 million in CIP year 18 still a developer contribution?
No, that would be outside grant funds that we'd be looking for.
And is that likely Caltrans?
Most likely federal monies, hopefully, probably whatever the next MAP 21 version would be. Hopefully we can get some work with our local Congress person to assist us in securing federal funds to do this project. It's an important intersection. Mission is impacting intersection. This is another important intersection. And we presented the option report to the committee a couple of years ago. It's very important to improve this intersection and make it better and easier for people to access Cottage Hospital. As the committee might remember, what people are doing when they're heading southbound on the 101, getting to the Cottage Hospital, they get back on the freeway northbound, then get off in Pueblo. Mm-hmm. Yeah, this would be able to eliminate that turning movement.
Undo the mistakes of Caltrans past.
Mm-hmm.
Committee Member Franz, thank you for bringing that up, though. That is a correction that we'll make on this. This is a draft, by the way, and so it was just recently put out, and we have had some problems with the software, and we've had staff put in hours of work that didn't get somehow saved, and some things, even just recently I found that the Cabrillo Bridge wasn't printed with the Streets Capital Program. It was somewhere in the Water Resources Program, and so we've handed it to you as a separate handout today when we recognized that it wasn't part of the packet. So there are some nuances here, and if you do see any other irregularities, please let me know, and we can certainly make the adjustments. The next project being the Della Vina Arriaga intersection. It's page 50 of 89. And this is, I'm pleased to report that Derek Bailey has received grant funding, the Highway Safety Improvement funding, for 2 projects, and I'll get to those, but he's also applying now for another HSIP grant for this intersection. There's due to the high crash history and high volumes, a traffic signal is now warranted for this intersection. And so he's initiating the work to seek a highway safety improvement grant for that construction of that intersection improvement. And really, this is the kudos to Derek again for these 2 items here under safety upgrades are directly related to the 2 grants that have just been received, or that we've been notified that we will be getting grants for. Oops, I'm sorry, I missed one. Let me go back. Traffic signal communication upgrades. That's number 64 of 89 in your handout. So the traffic signal communication upgrades, we have a traffic control room. We have where the signal lights are controlled at our operations center here, and we have whenever if there's a collision or if there's emergency or unpredictable circumstances, there is that communication that's necessary in the traffic control system. And so there are upgrades that are necessary and planned. And so for fiscal year 14, we're planning $80,000 worth of improvements, and then $100,000, and then back to, say, $25,000 maintenance improvements for that. So again, maintaining the infrastructure and traffic safety, very important. Now I move on to the thunder again of the kudos to Derek Bailey for applying and for securing 2 significant highway safety improvement grants. One in the amount of $900,000, and that's related to this traffic signal improvements. $900,000 for traffic signal modifications, and that's to improve or to add pedestrian countdown timers and improve vehicular indicators for 53 traffic signals throughout the city. So that's a significant amount of money for this benefit.
And that's adding pedestrian heads at signals that currently do not have them. So a couple of years ago, with the ARA money, we replaced the existing heads with the countdown. So this is adding new ped heads, which is really great.
So
like Anacapa and what is the people are always running Anacapa and Anapamu. Possibly, yeah.
So these are for city staff time associated with the grant funds. The next one is traffic safety capacity improvements, and again, this is a second highway safety improvement grant, and this grant was allocated in the amount of $493,500, and so a city match of the 65 is necessary. And this is based on the safety review at high crash intersections. We're looking for low-cost recommendations for safety, and that will be implemented and identified. So I'm sorry that Derek wasn't here today. He's out of town now to tell you more about it.
Well, 2 of the locations that I remember that that grant is going to go for, one is at Cabrillo Boulevard and Anacapa Street by the skate park. And so it's similar treatment that we've already done on Cabrillo Boulevard, more towards Castillo Street. I think one is at Bath, the other is at Chapala. And the other intersection is Calle Colorado and State Street, another pedestrian refuge island.
Great.
Actually, there are 5 intersections. Actually, I do have them. The
okay.
Cabrillo Anacapa, Cabrillo Corona Del Mar, state in Calle Palo Corrado, state in Islay, and state in Pedregosa. So again, kudos to Derek. I think it was his first time applying for these grants, and he was very successful. So we're going to let him keep trying.
Yeah, throw him on that
Yeah.
that roundabout. Come on.
So the totals for the utility user tax and gas tax allocation of $2.86 million approximately, and the Measure A component approximately 603. And again, these are numbers from the approved fiscal year 13. Those are starting point numbers. If the revenues go up, we will bump these numbers up. As I've noted before at the onset, which is pavement has really a dire need for more money, and I anticipate that if we get more increases in revenues, that we would be looking at the highest needs. And that's what we've tried to do here in these 15 projects that we're recommending for funding. So as you can see, it's a challenging job to balance the funds available. Moving on to a real happy story, which is the grant funds. And so, again, these are, we don't have discretionary monies here. Let's see. These are primarily, you can see these are primarily bridge replacements for the maintaining the existing, and you can see the totals here, significant totals. Cabrillo, while it's listed in fiscal 14, we're trying hard to get that even out to instruction in June if possible. So it could happen even in 13, but it wasn't listed in the 13 budget, so we've listed it here now. And there's a possibility it could be these funds could be allocated in fiscal year 14. Starting at the top again, the pavement management, the local state transportation program. We get these funds through the state through SB-CAG, and it's an annual amount by formula. And we use it for our local street and roadway maintenance repairs. And we found that this is one of the best ways that we can track these funds, because if we start splitting them up and we get audited, we have to track the funds. It's because we have such a high need in pavement maintenance, we've made a choice of keeping these in pavement so that we can ensure that they don't get split up and become a auditing problem for us later. Cabrillo again. This is only a part of the I think it's $24.8 million Cabrillo Bridge project. That's the total project cost. This grant is for the construction component. Similarly to CODA, CODA is slated for construction in the year 2014, so that would be 14-15 budget, but we're hoping that we can get that out to construction. But I think the CODA would only happen if we have favorable bids for Cabrillo. We have a city match component that we've been banking over the years, and so we're hoping that we can get good bids on Cabrillo, and that's another reason why we're trying to get Cabrillo accelerated, because construction costs currently are rising. We've noticed that in recent bids, and so we'd really like to get favorable bids so that we can find a way to fund CODA. The Anapamu Street Bridge is fortunately going to be 100% grant funded, no city match. And so we have yet to initiate this bridge, design of this bridge, but we've just gotten word that we've eligible, and this is for the design component. So we would be initiating the design, and I don't even have a year for the construction of this bridge. Not yet, anyway. Chapali Yananali, as a matter of fact, I think I'll have to make a change to this because it's going to be starting construction next spring, so it really is fiscal year 13. I'm sorry that it really shouldn't be on this fiscal year 14 list, but since it is, I want to let you know that we're wrapping up the right-of-way phase on this bridge. We just recently went to council and got our right-of-way acquisitions for this, very minor in nature, and this project is approximately $3 million, and we plan to get out to bid soon and into construction next spring. And it's coordinated with the Army Corps. There'll be an extension of that box culvert south of the railroad tracks, and part of the Lower Mission Creek Flood Control Project, a very integral component so that we can have the added capacity for Mission Creek. And so we are making our way down from the railroad tracks down to the ocean with these bridge and reach projects. So that's really good news for the lower State Street area and the capacity of increasing the capacity of Mission Creek. De La Guerre and Gutierrez, I'll talk to them at the same time because they're in the same boat. They're in the initial phases, and we're negotiating with a consultant for the design contract, and we'll soon be going to council for the design contract. And so we were moving forward with initiating these two projects. These two bridges were not included in the Lower Mission Creek EIS, Environmental Impact Study, and so we will be needing to do separate environmental. So these two bridges are going to have a long process because we have to now do some very conceptual and preliminary outreaches with all the stakeholders, so that we'll be initiating that. So that's the good news. We have 9 active bridge projects in the system, totaling approximately $100 million. So it's huge. It's a great big workload. We're appreciative of having that challenging work. And as you can see, some of it has competed in the past with match monies, but I'm happy to report, too, that because we have completed a couple bridge projects, namely Haley de la Vina and Ortega bridges, we have had the acquisition of some properties, and when we buy the properties under the bridge projects, we're able to sell them. And those funds that we sell them for, while we've only paid, say, 11.5 cents on the dollar for those properties, the city retains 100% of the sale amount and gets to use it as the match funds for another bridge project. So I've got a self-perpetuating funding source for bridge programs. So very pleased to say that our bridge program is alive and well and going strong, as well as the Lower Mission Creek project. The next item is the annual TDA, or Transportation Development Act. Thank you. Yes. And so for bicycle improvements, so we do have a lot of bicycle improvements that ideas and on the books. So do you have a specific target or on this one?
Yeah, we're going to be using this money as matching monies towards the Measure A grant that we're getting ready to submit to SBK.
And the last two items on, oops, I'm sorry. Let me go back. Last two items are associated with those two highway safety improvement programs. So these traffic signals, these are the grants. These are the grants for the two projects, as I mentioned, that Derek Bailey secured for the traffic signal improvements and the traffic safety capacity. So as you can see, $25 million for the grants is significant shot in the arm for a streets capital. And the $3.5 million of the discretionary funds is significant in that it goes back to that prioritization categories where it's important to bank and to manage the money such that we have appropriate matches for grants to be able to obtain these grant funds and to deliver these projects. So next steps, we're planning, I believe, in December to get to the Planning Commission with our capital program budget. And then in the spring, we would typically have our Finance Committee review. And I typically come back to the TCC in the spring and let you know, give you an update as to where we're at, where the revenue projections are, changes, modifications. You never know what the winter storms bring and what could happen. And then we'd be going to council for the budget review, and typically at the end of June, the council adopts the annual budget. And this year is very similar to the last 2 years of the budget. We had a $3.7 million budget approved in fiscal year 12. And again, last year's was our starting point for this year's was what was last year's. So our Streets Capital Program projects recommended to be funded coincide with our prioritization and ranking criteria. So with that, I'd entertain any questions that you may have.
I have a couple questions. So it's good to see we're moving on all these bridge projects and have been over the past few years. The ones that have been completed look fabulous, and we know they're stable, which is good. Can you just tell us, as far as obviously these bridges are coming due for being, replaced and worked on. How many decades from now does the city have to go through this in rapid succession as we're doing now?
Chair Blackerby, great comment. The reason we're doing bridges, as many bridges as we are, is that many of them were constructed at about the same time, approximately 100 years ago.
100, okay.
And so
Great.
the lifetime of the construction then has gotten to a point where the bridges now need replacement 100 years later.
Right.
With new standards, barring significant seismic events or natural disaster type things, we don't really know how many, if 100 or how many 100 years.
Right.
It's really dependent on a lot of factors, but certainly for lifetime or lifetimes is what we anticipate.
Beautiful.
So again, there's only a limited number of lower Mission Creek bridges, and that's the ones that we are getting grant funding for.
Mhm.
And it's the federal grant. The good news is that when they restructured the MAP 21 monies, the new
New safety loo.
New Safety Lou, they continued the funding for the federal highway bridge program. It's called a different name now, it's in a different category, but it's seamless from our perspective of receiving the funds. So we're really fortunate to be able to take the opportunity, and even the Mason Street Bridge and the Yananali Street Bridge, the right-of-way and the construction is 100% funded. So
Nice.
we're tremendously benefiting from the bridge program, and
Great.
it will increase our capacity in Lower Mission Creek and safety and the like.
So hopefully over 100 years from now, then they'll have to do this again, but we'll all be dead. If that's comforting somehow, I guess.
Thank you.
The other thing, yeah, it'll be all of us though. I'm not just singling anyone out. The other thing that I see is sort of listed in here, and I know that this committee has expressed its interest before, and members of the City Council have as well. And my understanding is there's money for it. I just want to ask Mr. Allen to set aside or whatever, but that's the update of the bicycle master plan. I noticed that there's something listed in here that mentioned bike master plan update. This is on the list, the quantitative ranking list, up pretty high actually. Planning bike master plan update, $100,000. I'm wondering, because from what I recall, there was money set aside for it before. Wondering either what happened to that, is that what that $100,000 is, and I would say, as far as prioritization goes, just the things that were on our agenda tonight, talking about the east side and bike routes over there, talking about the crosstown route going through Canon Perdido. We keep bringing up these piecemeal bicycle kind of planning improvements, and it's so, in the grand scheme of all of these things, it's so cheap to update a bicycle master plan, and I know it's something that gets used by the department constantly. I'm just wondering where that prioritization is, and yeah.
The funding that had been identified to do the bike master plan still rests in our streets capital fund and fund balance.
Okay.
So the money is still there. We also are looking at submitting an application for the Measure A funds to free up some of those city funds so they can be used for other purposes.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of if and when we move forward with that, that's really going to be up to council to say that's your next project or second next project. But we're not going to start any work on that until we finish with the east side.
Right. Okay. Good to know, members of the council and the audience. Mr. Bradley?
Looking at the ranking list, so four of the top 5 projects are ranked are pedestrian enhancement projects that don't have funding. It looks like 2 of those are on the east side. So I'm just wondering what the potential funding sources are for those.
Well, the top one, the downtown sidewalk improvements, that was funded at one time with redevelopment agency funds, but with the state eliminating RDA, those funds went away. So in terms of funding, we're taking a look at the remaining bond proceeds to see if that can be used for a portion of this, and we'll focus our attention on the sidewalks that are in the worst condition. Let's see, the next one, East Side Neighborhood Enhancement. That's what we had talked about in the item 4. Once we have completed the Neighborhood Transportation Management Plan and developed the Neighborhood Enhancement program, then we'll be able to clearly identify funding sources for that one. Cleveland School Accessibility Improvement. Is that different from the? I'm not sure what that one is. You know what?
Don't we have Safer
We have a
School for that?
Safe Route to School grant for Cleveland, so I think that one is already funded. School zone safety improvements. We have money already in the school zone safety. We're going to be spending a lot of that money over on the east side, and then there's also money that we have available when we need to do striping and signage changes throughout the city. So we're not asking for any additional funding this year, but I anticipate probably using up the balance of that money this year, or maybe a portion of the next fiscal year, and then we'll be looking for additional funding in future years.
Other question? Yeah, Mr. France.
Thank you, Mr. Chair Blackerby and Mr. Wozniak. In terms of the budgeting here, what is a variable? In other words, what incomes, aside from projects, the zero-sum game factor, where projects are competing against each other, and outside grants, what's the flexibility? And I mean, beyond even the purview of this committee or even this city, like what's flexible? I'm seeing utility users tax, gas tax, and then Measure A, which is like the non-grants competitive Measure A, and non-101 corridor bulk of the Measure A sales tax money that we're contributing. What's the elasticity?
Committee Member France, these revenue streams have stayed very similar over the last couple of years, so I'm confident they're not going to change a lot. They could change some if we happen to have the economy gets a little better, or sales increase, with Measure A, et cetera. So last year we did see an increase, but that was reflected in these numbers. So
the only revenue source there where you could see I wouldn't call it significant or more than a traditional increase in the amount of money coming in would be the Measure A, because that's sales tax. So as people spend more money, as the economy gets better, we will see that come up. But the utility user tax, that's just what people are paying. A portion of the taxes on the utility, and that kind of goes up and down. We don't anticipate seeing a major bump up in that, even when the economy is strong. It's pretty remain fairly constant. State gas tax, that's what we get from the state. Even though the price of gasoline has gone up, the amount of money that cities and counties get from gas tax has been flat for 20 plus years. It's a fixed amount. It's not a percentage of gasoline tax. So we don't really anticipate seeing major changes in that area either. So the only one would really be Measure A.
And local, the LSTP is the one other kind of variable.
It's been formula. It's been steady for the last several years.
Yeah, in fact, it's gone down. I think when the economy was the strongest, I think we had around 360,000, 80,000.
Not much variability.
Not much variability.
And could you clarify again why that's traditionally programmed in, or has to be programmed in pavement maintenance program?
It doesn't have to be programmed in the pavement maintenance, but we've been audited a few times over the years, and so if we don't do something like this, and if it happens to be split up, it can become a real difficult or challenging issue for the auditors and for staff to keep track of this. So since there is a continuous need for this money in pavement, and we do have annual contracts in in the $1 to $2 million range, or $2 million plus, it's easy for us to spend this money annually for the same purpose and therefore track it easily. So that's the reason why we've chosen to put it in this category. The pie can be split up in different ways, but it's still the pie.
Yeah, and that money flows from the state through SBCAG, and we don't get the money until the end of the year. So the timing in terms of putting in the pavement maintenance works really better for us as well.
And sometimes projects don't happen for various reasons, environmental or situational, but pavement we're doing every year. We have confidence in it. We just have confidence in the way that we manage this, that it will be tracked the best way that can be tracked.
Got it. Another quick question. This is my little soapbox here, but drop in the bucket. But I'm sure we do have a city lobbying mechanism in Sacramento. Is that correct? And also there's the mayor through the League of Mayors. I'd like to add my voice to, as you said, Mr. Wozniak, the maintenance of our existing infrastructure being the challenge that it is, specifically the surface streets, the pavement maintenance. If this is so universally shared by cities, which it is, and the gas tax has not even been adjusted for inflation, right? Does not keep pace, then cities in our city need to put out the voice. This is only going to get worse, and the gas tax needs to be based on the actual facilities that those vehicles use. So that's my soapbox. The other quick question is there any other city funds that could be programmed into transportation infrastructure? I mean, we're talking about budget, right? Big thinking,
Thanks,
big picture.
John. Well, of course, general fund monies. When you look at the utility user tax, that is general fund money. But the city council, when the UUT was passed, allocated 50% of the UUT to go towards street maintenance. And that now with the Measure A, we have a maintenance of effort that we're required to meet, and the UUT is the discretionary money that we use to meet the maintenance of effort. So if we don't meet the maintenance of effort, whatever dollar amount we miss it by, our Measure A revenues get reduced by that amount of money. So yeah, the council could obviously allocate general fund money to go towards our projects, but their general fund is just now coming out of major budget crises, as the nation is. So at some point in time, the council might be able to do that, but I'm not asking them to do that right now.
And then, Chair Blackerby, are we going to do a round of comments, or is it fair to put in a comment now?
Yeah, it's fair. Go for it.
Thank you. So this is what happens, I think, unfortunately for me, when we go past 2.5 hours, so bear with me on these comments. First off, maybe not enough blood sugar for my better judgment. Yeah.
Hey,
coffee.
downtown parking gets donuts. I'm just saying.
All
right.
Actually,
All right.
fair comment. It is tough to be about 2 hours 45 minutes in for going over the CIP, but about 800 bicyclists were in DC for basically the week where we converted to MAP 21 for the federal policy. It's a brutal policy for alternative transportation. Safe routes to school and transportation enhancements were basically folded. Transportation enhancements basically disappeared, got another name, and the pot shrunk significantly. One way that, and Mr. Wozniak, you had a good point that we have this system of kind of ranking projects, and it's kind of funny because you see the ranked projects and you see what's funded, and it's hard because it doesn't quite match, and maybe our system isn't the best. And there's a lot of different ways you can look at budgeting and prioritizing projects. That different people are going to have a different perspective. That's just the reality. One perspective is in terms of traffic safety by mode share, and in a national perspective, it is completely disproportionate. The paltry amount. I mean, we're talking now less than 2% of national transportation dollars are going to bike and ped. Yet they're making up something like 14% of traffic fatalities, right? And people all the time talk about, oh, well, there's this bike ped stuff that's just frivolous projects. Well, if you think about people who are actually dying as a result of the way our transportation system is managed, actually there's a lack of equity there. And unfortunately, a sad reality is that tends to be reflected in our general budgets. Part of it, too, is matching federal grants. And the city of Santa Barbara is a progressive one, and we do have a visionary general plan in terms of the circulation element, and the complete streets effort, in fact, cites the city of Santa Barbara's general plan and transportation element as how it basically got started. So we have this visionary policy, and we have this challenge to get to a system that is equitable to bikes and pedestrians, because not only, I mean, when we look at what's spent, the 6% of trips to work are by bike in the city of Santa Barbara now. That's really significant, 6%. The funding might not effectively match that. Again, the fatalities. We are, what was it, in the last, Sergeant McGrew was out there ticketing bicyclists because bicyclists were like third in the state of all the 50-some counties in terms of death and an injury, significant injury on bike. And so there is an inequity in terms of physical risk that people are put when they interface with our transportation infrastructure. And again, I'm sorry, we're 2 hours, 45 minutes in to go into that, but one perspective I'd like to offer on the budget and maintaining an existing infrastructure is our infrastructure inherently, and we're getting better, but inherently our infrastructure is not equitable. And when we talk about these other programs, often it's easy for decision makers to feel like those aren't core programs, but they're fundamental because people are using our roadways, walking, biking, getting off transit, and driving. One other comment, and again, bear with me here. In terms of bridges, it is great that the quality and caliber of bridge maintenance in the city of Santa Barbara is great. And a vision that I would offer, however, is sometimes I work with youth here in the city of Santa Barbara, and we ride through and partner with the city. In fact, we're partnering tonight, giving out lights the city of Santa Barbara sponsored to bicyclists who don't have lights and they're caught in the dark. A lot of the kids that we work with aren't aware of where the creeks are. Because our bridges, sometimes when we look at these projects, I'm not even aware that it's a bridge because you don't even notice that there's a creek when you cross it. And we have this top-notch bridge infrastructure, which is great. And, just allows for such great circulation. It's just funny as a priority, though. It's good that sometimes we won't be able to maintain every bridge in the city 100 years into the future when we'll all be dead. So that's my comment. Thank you.
Thanks.
Actually, sorry, Chair Blackerby. The last comment I'll make is if we're planning on putting a lot of effort and public engagement in the East Side process, we got to get that funded. The pedestrian project that is listed as unfunded currently, plus any other transportation improvements that might come, that we've got the timeline of the City Council going through the budget, and it's kind of meshing with the East Side study. And that risk that's been mentioned, I think Caitlin Carlson from Coast mentioned, that maybe they're not going to interface quite right, and we're going to come out with all these priorities, and we already sealed up the budget, that we have to be painfully aware of that because we're engaging our citizens in a traditionally overlooked area of our city, and we need to do our best to make sure we can fund those projects as soon as possible.
Were you going to say something, Mr. Allen?
I have worked with staff in building the process and going back to council where the council will have time to make adjustments to the budget. If they decide they want to have reprioritized the CIP to put money towards the East Side, they can do that, or they can make a determination to set aside money from block grant money, community block grant money to go towards the East Side. So it's a bit in the process. But one of the things that we all have to remember, though, depending upon what the project is, it's going to take some time to design a project, too. And so I don't want council to set aside a bunch of money for projects that I won't need or John won't need for a couple of years. So we're going to develop a plan based on what we hear from the residents and make it a realistic plan, design and construction, and how many years it's going to take to do that. So I hear what the committee says. I share that because I even mentioned to the council the worst thing that we can do is go do this planning effort in this neighborhood and not have a plan on how we're going to implement it or don't have a funding strategy of how we're going to implement it. That would be worse than not going to the neighborhood at all. So I hear you, and I think we have a really good strategy to work on developing a financial plan for it.
Other questions? Yeah, Ms. Rodriguez?
I have a question. How do you work with the, I'm sorry I don't know the name of the agency, the official name, the folks that work on the creeks and make sure that they're clean and are flowing properly and are channeled properly. How do you correlate your bridge work with that part of our government
Thanks
agency?
for asking that, Committee Member Rodriguez. We work closely with the Creeks staff and Creeks manager. I meet regularly with the Creeks manager, and we have developed a process by which we would discuss with them early on especially with these new bridges that are just starting up. We get in discussions with them right away and start talking about significant issues. So not only the creeks, but the stakeholders, the community stakeholders, and we would solicit or we would develop a process where we would solicit their comments. So we have had some bridge projects that we have had some learned lessons from, from recent bridges that have gone through the boards and commissions, and from that we've come through with a better process, with a better understanding. So we're working closely with them now, and and we have had great progress in responding to their concerns. An example of that would be on our Coda Bridge project, which we are currently in design, and we are modifying the project to address these concerns that the Creek staff have brought up. So we are planning to move forward to the boards and commissions with a unified staff understanding of the issues.
Other questions, comments? And one I forgot to mention, I feel like the last time we were here and going through the sidewalk maintenance, I know there's no sidewalk infill in this year, but I had asked back then, I know that there's a separate prioritization for infill projects and maintenance, I'm assuming too, or does the maintenance just, if here's a tree root, let's figure this out? I've just always wondered how those things get prioritized as far as those individual it's kind of minutia, but let
me talk maintenance first, and I'll talk infill second. So sidewalk maintenance, James Russell and Jeff Brent in the street maintenance section of the Transportation Division, they're the ones to go out and perform that work, either by contract or by city workforce. We have a list of locations where we have sidewalks that's either deteriorated or uplifted from tree roots. A lot of it is called in by the public, and a lot of it is noticed by staff when they're out doing work in the roadway and other areas. And we have a list of locations that far exceeds the amount of money we have available to address. But we hit the worst conditions first. So we do between actual remove and replace. Another thing called padding, where we use asphalt to eliminate the lip, to grinding, where we grind the edge of the uplift to eliminate the trip hazard. So that's an annual program. And in terms of what the crews do, we do it pretty much year-round. In terms of the sidewalk infill, it's been a while before we brought that process to this committee. In fact, I don't know if any of them, I think Kaufman Gray was the only member of the committee at the time where we brought it before the committee. Don't ask me to do it anytime soon. With loss of Sarah, I'm not sure when we'll be able to do it. But basically, we have a council-adopted priority for the sidewalk infill where we identified all the missing links, and a prioritization is how we identify what sidewalks will be built. And basically, it's on a suggested route to school, destinations such as the park, church, business, bus route, or bus stop. Those are some of the criteria that we use, and there's a point scale that we use to do it as well. In terms of why aren't you seeing infill, again, that's new, rather than maintaining the existing infrastructure. So all the sidewalks we've been putting in recent years have been via grants.
With the exception of one, we are going in construction with La Colina sidewalk infill, and that's starting very soon.
That's a grant.
It's been out to construction, but that's grant.
That's grant.
But it is an infill
by
project.
Hope School.
So we do infill as funds are available.
Right.
It's just with an improvement, it's challenging for us to find money just to maintain what we've got.
Right. Okay. Other comments, questions? We appreciate all the time. The item actually says the committee hear report and provide input to staff on the options for improvements. Reading the wrong one. Hear report and provide input on prioritization of transportation streets projects. Do people feel like we have put everything forward, got everything out that we need to say? Do you feel like you've heard what you need to hear from us?
Appreciate all and any comments. I think you grasped that it is challenging, and so we'd love to fund more. We have distinguished between needs and requirements. There's a great number of needs, but there are some requirements that we're trying to meet as well. So it's a real tough balancing act that we face, and we just value the feedback that we get so we can hopefully stay on target.
Okay. Mr. Kaufman-Gray.
Well, I just want to make one comment. I mean, there's so many things that need to be done, and with the limited money that we have, I have to say I think you did a good job of trying to narrow it down. I definitely don't want to jeopardize any of the possible projects on the east side, whatever the neighbors come up with. So I hope that, we will be able to leverage grants and stuff to fund that area. But I want to make one comment about the pavement maintenance. It sounds, like very boring. It sounds like a lot of money. But, that's what keeps the city going. And it's not just cars. It is bicycles that need nice pavement to walk, and it's nice. We also need pedestrians need nice pavement so they don't trip when they're crossing the street or fall into a pothole or something. So, if we don't keep this at this level of service, we've all traveled around California, and there's a lot of cities that are a lot worse than we are if you go, and that's because they're not doing the amount of money that we're doing to keep them, at least, even though we're falling behind. I think we're still a lot higher than probably a lot of cities, at least. Maybe it's the areas that I'm driving in those cities. Maybe I just happen to fit the bad areas, but yeah. But I think we're doing a pretty good job, and I hate to see, even though we're falling behind, if we don't put this type of money in, we're going to look a lot worse. Sure, we all complain about when it's time to do the slurry seal and we have to move our cars and stuff, but it really, I notice a difference after it's done. It's a maintenance that in doing that, instead of having to tear up the whole street and spend twice or 3 times or 4 times the amount to actually rebuild the whole street again. So, again, even though it looks like we're putting so much money into that one part of this budget, the whole city is really needs it. So, I agree with how you're doing it right now. Even though I definitely think the bicycle master plan should somehow get done sooner. So anyway, that's my comment.
Yeah, and just thinking, knowing that once these bridges are done, maybe the amounts of money that we're putting aside for things like that can go to, things that are more, I guess, that people experience every day other than, we would definitely experience if there were a flood and our bridges were bad and we had, more deterioration. We would experience it in a very dangerous and bad way if we didn't keep them up. But, that major money that we're putting aside now and the energy we're using and going to get grants and matching funds for that, hopefully someday we can be forward thinking and maybe the, big dollars like that can go a really long way for, all the different modes. Okay. So,
Actually, Chair Blackerby, if I could make one last comment, and again, this is a general one, but I think this may be helpful in our comments as they go to staff and as council. I'm so thankful to have 2 council members here, House and Kathy Murillo. We obviously are facing, scarcity in looking at this budget, and the reality is there's a lot of infrastructure and not a lot of money, and it's just very true. We're playing we're behind in the game of maintaining our infrastructure, just the streets alone. One of the things that we can do through planning, and this is important, I think, just to be real and to present, very feasible scenarios to community members as we engage in the East Side planning process in the future and the Bikeway Master Plan, is what can we do that's not a major infrastructure change that can help us see the improvements that we want to see. And one of the things that we do have available to us through planning is when it's possible to make the right trade-offs and the right priorities. Not everything is a shovel and concrete project. And obviously we're looking at shovel and concrete projects now, but we're also looking at planning. And with the East Side project, certainly as we engage in this, maybe we can put more of an emphasis on projects that aren't going to be stuck years behind in the CIP because of the reality of how expensive our system is. So sometimes just the striping, as we do repaint, we just restriped Milpas as it was redone. That project was so much less expensive than that would have been if that was a hard infrastructure project. So that's my last comment. And yeah, tough trade-offs. Obviously, what planning that we can bump up and what related to East Side neighborhood study that we can be ready to fund, and I appreciate the challenge to make sure that we can effectively fund those projects as they're planned and ready as projects to be funded, because we can't fund what doesn't yet exist. I hear you. So anyway, thank you.
All right. So do we need, I don't think we need any kind of motion on that, right? Okay. Okay.
Thank you.
So, yeah, thank you, John. So thank everybody for hanging in. Soren had to leave earlier for a prior commitment. Any other
May I just
announcements?
May I just make an announcement, or
Please
just
do.
point out that council is currently doing interviews for this committee, and 2 of our current members did not reapply. And tonight, if we don't have a meeting in December, is their last meeting. One being member Bradley, and the other is Mr. Tabor, who's not here tonight. So I want to acknowledge and thank you for your service on this committee, and you'll be missed.
Absolutely. Thanks. 5?
5.
Yeah. All right. Thank you guys for hanging in there too. Yeah.
Chair
Mr. Frank?
Blackerby, would you be willing to entertain adjourning this meeting with respect for our departing committee chairs and for our mobility coordinator, Sarah Grant?
Absolutely. And also in memory of David Damiano, if we could. All right.
I move to adjourn.
All right. Motion to adjourn. Second. All those in favor? Great. We're adjourned.